Welcome on in, everybody, for your surprise bonus Sunday stream. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. This is why you gotta have your notifications turned on, man. If you don't have your notifications turned on, how will you know I'm here? So today, we're gonna be talking about, we're gonna go on to our second part of Grief-Stricken wins with the rune. I wanted to do this a couple weeks ago, but we didn't get around to it, so we're gonna do it today. Should be fun. Also, while we wait for that, hold on, I'm just seeing. I think he wanted to hop into some sort of program. I mean, whatever, it is what it is. So we'll do that. That being said, holy shit, have you guys seen how completely right I was? Oh, the Nancy Pelosi video? Hold on. Where the fuck is that? Is it an opening? Is there a Sunday playlist? I honestly, it's been a minute
with
since
Monday.com's in.
I forgot to do my, here it is. Found it.
Good morning. Sunday morning.
Okay, now we have autoplay on now. What the I guess we're in a playlist. Never mind. My landlord is suing me because I bought a house. They want to keep us down. I'm 26. I bought my first home, but he won't take that away from. I mean, you just need to find someone to sublet your apartment, man. That's my advice. You need to find someone to sublet. There's a concept known as cover. Cover is a term used in the law of contracts to describe a remedy available to a buyer who has received an anticipatory repudiation of a contract for the receipt of goods. Okay, this is not just for people buying goods. It's also for like landlords and shit. Housing. Oh my god. Oh, Jesus Christ. Anyway, we could get into it more. Google is fucking trash, but you need to find an alternative. Which reminds me, I want to show you this tickety talk.
This house has more bush than my mom in the 80s.
Okay, nice. I don't know why you know how much bush your mom had.
Zoran is going to win, and he's going to win on the backs of Gen Z and millennials. Early voting has concluded in New York City, and we see a clear pattern. If you look at the data that's actually coming out of New York from the early vote, the under 45-year-old vote share is 46.5% of the total early votes. And much of the polling that is predicted a neck-and-neck race, a 50-50 race between Cuomo and Zoran, they have projected a 30% under 45 final poll. That shows you that right now, because Gen Z and millennials are coming into their own politically and finally seizing their power, we have a real chance to change politics in this country and in the Democratic Party, where we won't have to be doing lesser of two evils, but rather candidates who support the causes that we believe in and we actually believe want to achieve change. Zoran is going to win.
Okay, so I brought that up because, and you're like, Mike, you've already told us how right you were. That's true, but some exit polling, some demographic data is starting to come out, and the biggest age group in the New York City primary was 18 to 24-year-olds. Not only was I right, I was completely right, which is also why I told you that the polling was wrong, because it was overestimating the supporters of Cuomo and underestimating the support of, like, I was completely, like, I think one of the things that really pisses me off is I am not just right. Like, you know, Zoran won or Zoran didn't win. That's a, you know, coin flip, right? I'm right, and I explain exactly how other people are wrong. I predicted exactly fucking correctly. I tell you, it's actually, he's probably gonna win comfortably. Like, my correctness was fucking batshit. Like, actually insane how right I was. Like, I don't even know why I make these, like, really insane predictions. Like, eventually I'm gonna get one of them wrong. You know what I mean? Like, eventually I'm gonna get something wrong. And people are gonna be like, oh, he gets everything wrong. It's so much riskier for me to be, you know, make these predictions and be wrong than it is positive to make them and be right, because nobody has any idea how difficult it is. I sent a qualifying tenant to them and they were straight up ignored. Yeah, I mean, your landlord just seems like a scumbag, basically. Holy fucking shit. Like, this is wild. So yes, me pointing out that I was right That's great. But this is there are more people voted who are 18 to 25 than 65 to 69. I'll say that again. Way more people voted who were 18 to 24 than were 65 to 69. Do you understand how fucking insane this is? And the lowest turnout was with Gen X and, you know, yeah, Gen Xers, folks. They're fucking evil. This is what Bernie Sanders wanted to do, and he wasn't able to do it. But I want you to understand something, chat, that without Bernie Sanders 10 years ago, do you think the people that were 8 years old then would be voting today? Bernie Sanders is the left's Goldwater. Like, he is the left's Goldwater. Without him, we wouldn't have where we are today. I also want to talk about the people that are like trying to say that Zoran is a Zionist or that there's no difference between Trump and Zoran. It's all electoral politics. If you're a pure anti-electoralist, you are an ultra-leftist, and you're not a Leninist. You're not a Marxist-Leninist. You're not any kind of actual left-winger. You're just kind of an anarchist. And you know, you're kind of stupid, to be honest with you. The point of Zoran is not to usher in socialism with one vote for New York City mayor. Like, nobody is saying that that is what is going to happen. What we're doing is we are directly attacking foreign imperialism. I'm a single issue voter for American empire. And Zoran is exactly the guy who's going to rein in the American empire. He's going to go against what the status quo wants. If you care about the genocide of Gaza, you have to vote. You have to do everything you can to get Zoran elected. You need to show people that supporting Israel is dangerous for their political career. That's what ended Vietnam. The Vietnamese put up a fucking bloody war for 20 fucking years to fight off the imperialists. And they were able to finally achieve victory not because Americans suddenly switched sides and joined North Vietnam and invaded the South, but we just pulled out. It's our job in the Imperial Corps to just get our people to pull the fuck out. And if you are interfering with that, you are actively aiding the enemy. You're fucking stupid. At the very least, people should judge Zoran by his enemies, which you're on the left. You should also hate. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Okay, hold on. Okay, anyway, so that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be posting something on TikTok later today. Make sure you're following the Tickety Talk. Make sure you're following the tickety talk, because I want to make a post about analyzing this. And that reminds me, I made a TikTok this weekend. I highly recommend you watch it, because it's what I want you to understand about my politics.
The left needs to learn how to dog whistle. I'm serious. I'm dead serious. In New York City, Zoran Mandami won.
Did I say Mandami? God damn it. There's two things I can never say: intifada and Mamdani. My whiteness just immediately muddles my mouth and I say it wrong. Like, I struggle to say intifada and Mamdani. And Xinjiang. Yeah. I don't know why the fuck I can't say it. I just cannot say the words. Mamdani. Oh my god, that's such a good TikTok. Oh my god, I have another idea for a TikTok. Thank you for 8-armed Willie. Oh, I have such a good idea for a TikTok now. Thank you, sir. My brain at 7 a.m. before I am caffeinated. Holy shit. It takes a couple hours to boot up. All right, let me find out what Arun is like. What the fuck's Arun doing? All right, hold on. All right, chat. Hold on. I guess I'm doing it. How do I turn on shared chat? Where is that setting? Oh, okay. I have to turn it on okay. I've never actually done this, chat, so hold on. All right, anyway, keep watching this while I do this.
City mayoral primary, because he was able to dog whistle and use euphemisms and to phrase his point of view in a way that was acceptable to the uninitiated. So much of the conversation on the left in this country involves having a panoply of terms you need to learn. It's completely impenetrable to regular people, and is not phrased in a way that is actually appealing to those that are not already part of the club. Stop treating your leftism like a club and start treating it like you're supposed to be, which is an organizing opportunity. And right now, I don't care if you are a revolutionary leftist, a communist, or whatever. If you do not look at what's happening in New York City and think that this is a win for our movement, you are wrong. And the reason why you're wrong is because Zoran is demonstrating to everybody in an undeniable fashion that you do not need to kowtow to Israel. You do not need to shade your opinion on Israel, and you will be a successful person in politics. And this is what is going to give space for the change that we need. If you actually care about ending the unbelievable crimes that are happening in Palestine, the number one thing you need to do as an American is to get our political class to withdraw the support that the IDF and Israel depends upon. Grow up, be smarter, learn what a euphemism is, learn what a dog whistle is, and take a W. The left needs to learn how to dog whistle.
Yeah, like I the reason why I made this post is because I saw a lot of posts that were quite frankly stupid. I'm
serious.
And the reason why I made these, like, and I'll basically get down to what they are. They were basically people being ultra leftists, and they were going like, Zoran winning, you know, he serves the same function as Trump and capitalism. And, you know, he's just capturing people back into the Democratic Party. And it's like, no, he's not. No, he's actually not. What he's doing is he is converting people from apolitical to left wing. If you are a revolutionary socialist, you should be fucking cheering, because that means a lot more people are going, you know, socialism isn't that crazy. And I got to tell you, chat, those people are the ones that are easier to convert to. Maybe we have to do a revolution than going, wow, no elections, just killing, no elections, just war. Like, that idea is a bad idea if you're trying to recruit people to your side. This is why being a centrist Marxist fucking rules. Because it's not that I don't think revolutions are good. Revolutions have been liberatory all throughout our history. The idea that, oh, everything but revolutions is not worth doing pretty much belie, like, are these people in the same country as me? What percent of people even know what revolutionary socialism is? 1%? You need to actually build a base and then work from it. And the other thing is, and this is an irrefutable point, revolutions typically succeed in periods of frustrated reform. That means people like Zoran in power getting attacked and blocked by capitalists and pissing everybody off and exposing how there really is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. There's no, you can tell people this shit academically.
Okay, wait, can you hear me?
They can learn it in a book. Yeah, 1 second.
I can't hear you. What the fuck?
All right, hold on. Let me make sure my it is actually working. Although
I hate this like knock shit.
it seems like it works to me. I don't. Yeah,
It's,
I mean,
it's so much more complicated than just a Discord call, honestly.
And everything
I don't know,
seems
maybe
to
I'm
be,
a boomer or something.
I think he's a boomer, chat. I think he's a boomer.
Despite, I'm pretty sure you're older than me, Mike, which is the funny part.
I think I'm the oldest.
Yeah.
In the Hassan orbit. Who's older than me?
Good question. I don't know.
I think I am. I'm older than
you are
Ethan.
probably the oldest.
I'm a year older than Ethan Klein. Let me show you how Ethan Klein looks. I got in Twitter jail, chat, because people mass reported some tweet I made years ago. I said KYS for keep yourself safe. I was trying to encourage the person to practice good safety because they were like doing some sort of dangerous activity. And for some reason, you can't tell. Apparently that means something else. I just learned this. I'm a boomer. Apparently you can't say keep yourself safe or KYS. Apparently it means something else. I didn't know that. So, oops. So I got in trouble for like a couple hours on Twitter. This was like a very, very old tweet. So it is what it is. Don't do that, chat. You can't say stuff like that.
Yeah. Apparently KYS means something else other than keep yourself safe, which is crazy.
Yeah. I hate how people do dog whistles like that.
I know, it's wild.
You know? Anyway, did you see my recent TikTok about how the left needs to learn how to dog whistle?
I don't go on TikTok ever.
Well, it's actually not that bad of a platform. I'm trying to force myself to like it more and more.
No, I mean, I just don't know how to use it. That's the thing. I've gone there and I'm like, okay.
You know what? They actually have a pretty easy
idea. Okay, to give you an idea of how little I've used it, right?
Yeah.
I keep getting AI ads on TikTok.
Yeah.
Like I haven't used it at all, right? And then that's the first thing I get.
I saw the first AI slop that I actually liked or laughed at because it was a basically, have you ever seen the really old thing where it's called Supply Side Jesus? Have you ever heard of that before?
I mean, I know the meme, I think. Yeah. I know the meme, but
it was originally a thing made by he was a senator. What's his fucking name, Chad? My brain is not making the Al Franken. Thank you. Al Franken used to have this like left-wing website called like the Lying Liars and the Liars Who Tell Them or some shit like this. It was some very boomer name. And he did like this comic Supply Side Jesus that eventually was like, you know, turned into a little bit of like an animated, you know, short. And yeah, it is a meme now. People still use it, but somebody used AI to make like a Trump Christian church. And for some reason, it's the first time I've ever chuckled at Boomer Slop. And that's how I realized I'm getting old. I chuckled at Boomer AI Slop because it was just like a really, you know, it was just pointing out how hypocritical Christians are. Wow. This is going to get them to change their ways.
Yeah, do boomers use TikTok or...
I think they don't. I mean, I think they do.
That's what I thought. I thought they're all on Facebook.
There's nothing like there's young people that use Facebook, you know? I mean, there's no complete generational divide. I don't know.
I guess not.
Here's something that I wanted to mention before we get into it. I don't know if you saw this, but apparently the age group, the 5-year age group that voted the most in the New York City primary at the highest rate was 18 to 24-year-olds.
That's not surprising. In the primaries, that's not surprising.
That's insane. That's never happened before.
No, I mean, no. Okay, let me rephrase that. I'm saying the reason that it's not surprising is because Zoran won. That's the reason. So, that's the reason I'm saying, yeah, of course, of course that makes sense. Like, that's why he got carried all the way to the finish line, right? It's the young people.
Well,
it's the youngins.
And it's not just like young people that always show up. It was brand new. It was basically people who've never shown up before at a rate they've never shown up before. This man is 40, chat.
Was Zoran?
It was Zoran. Yeah, and Zoran's 8 years younger than me, chat. Holy shit!
You're 48. Damn.
No, shut the fuck up. He's 33. He can't even run for president. That motherfucking idiot. God damn. No, look at Ethan Klein. This guy's 40. Bro.
Oh, Ethan is 40. Got it. Okay,
Bro,
Ethan is 40.
Look at this.
Hold on, wait. I'm pulling up your stream on my end.
Oh my god.
Wait. 1 second.
Bro, that's crazy, man. He looks like he's about to. He's like, I'm deciding whether I want to take Social Security or wait till I'm 70. What the fuck? My dad looks better than him, and he's like 70. He's like 70. Hold on, let me think. 73. Jesus Christ.
That's what going on a fucking eternal crash out over like a handful of content creators with absolutely no fucking control and being a hateful piece of shit does to you. So sorry, not sorry.
Oh my god, dude. Holy shit. That's crazy.
That's what being a hateful piece of shit does to you. It ages you, man.
How can you be aged when you're living in your $9 million Bel Air mansion with 8 different, domestic servants and having to stream for like, how many hours does he stream a week? 10? 5? Legitimately the laziest human being to ever live.
I mean, like, why did it, like, the man makes millions of dollars. Why did he spend like, who knows how long making a fucking video? What was it? The
content, dude. I'm sorry for bringing it up to you while you're here to talk about very serious shit, but it's Sunday fun day, so we're ruining that already.
I mean, it's a light taster before we actually get into like. I think honestly, like talking about it a little bit is a good. It's a good like taster. It's like a good chaser because like we're gonna be talking about fucking insane serious shit.
I think the one thing that I would definitely point to for everybody is when genocides are happening, they don't just happen in the place that they're happening. It's a global participation. And I think that's what links the Gazan genocide to this one that we're about to cover is there is no innocent party when a genocide happens. Okay, like it's not just a local thing that you can go like, oh well, that was a crime some other nation committed. Genocide is a crime that we're all guilty of. And Ethan Klein is part of the permission structure Israel needs in order to do the genocide, which is he's trying to create a cloud of fear over speaking out about it. If you are a prominent person speaking out about the genocide, you're going to have people like Ethan Klein and Asmongold attacking you. You're going to have these people trying to ruin your reputation. You're going to have these people attacking you and then claiming, well, we don't support what's going on. Don't believe what people say. Believe what they do. And what they do with their streams every day, all day, is try to figure out ways of harassing people. Now, personally, as somebody who is one of the primary targets and has been one of the primary targets for this for many years, these guys are fucking dickless. They are losers. They have no motion. It's all internet comments. They are fucking cowards. And honestly, everybody who I've seen actually stand up to them and not act hurt has thrived. If you act hurt, if you hide, then then you're like taking away your power. And that's when they succeed. If you're just up there unaffected, moisturized, and you are saying what's right, I think you generally will see that people vibe with that. And I, at least on the, hopefully we can effectuate some change, because the situation in Gaza is so fucking dire. And, Zoran is like that one little light in the darkness where it's like, oh, this guy went up there and said, I am not going to condemn protest slogans.
I'm going to cut you off for 1 second because I want to say one thing. There's a sort of thing where, there's a little thing where we think, like, when we say, oh, all these genocides are connected, all these genocides are, connected with one another. I feel like every time we say that, it feels like magical, or it feels like a little abstracted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely bring it home. Concretize it for us.
It feels, you're going to see that in this video, because it's not just like, oh, we're metaphorically fighting against the same machine. No, these fuckers are literally holding conferences saying, this is what we did. This is exactly how we took care of, in this case, this is how we took care of the LTTE. We bombed the fucking shit out of the Tamils mercilessly. You'll see that at the end of the video. It's not just like, oh, we're metaphorically in this anti-colonial struggle. We're metaphorically in this anti-colonial, fight together. It's not metaphorical. It's literal. It's literal. It's exactly literal. It's the same people that are bombing Gaza right now are the same people. Like, they went to this conference, right? One of the 40 countries that went to the conference that Sri Lanka set up to basically take a victory lap and say, this is how we killed the Tamils, this is how we killed the Tigers, was Israel. Israel was one of them. Yeah. And since then, there's a post by the Jerusalem Post by an IOF officer, former IOF officer. Hold on. Let me see if I can find that, because that's a literal post. Jerusalem Post, Sri Lanka.
All right, hold on.
Here we go. Can Israel? Chat. Here we go. I got you right now. This is the thing. It's in the chat right now. Right? Can Israel eliminating Hamas? Insights from Sri Lanka's defeat of the Tamil Tigers. Security expert Moshe Elad argues the case of Sri Lanka proves that terror groups can in fact be defeated, can be completely defeated through military means. Israel acknowledges that they're modeling everything off of Sri Lanka.
Well, didn't Israel help? Like, do the
Israel
genocide
for the
side?
longest time? Yes. So what Israel did, Israel was extensively involved in this. So in part one, I covered the fact that Solel Boneh, which is a civil engineering firm in Israel, set up settlements for Sinhalese settlers in the Mahawali program. But during this, I don't talk about it too much, but Israel specifically collaborated with Sri Lanka to build a kind of patrol boat called the Devora class boat. It's based off of Dabur. So they specifically built a boat for Sri Lanka, right, to basically fight the Tigers. They also sold Kafir jets. III also sold jets to Sri Lanka, which you'll see happen. They bomb an orphanage with it in 2006.
Yeah.
And then they also, so during 2009, Israel sold radars, like flying radars, basically, that Sri Lanka used to basically detect the location of the no-fire zones, which are the hospitals, actually, and they bomb it. They bomb the hospital, like almost exactly to the T what you're seeing in Gaza. So they do the same thing. So for the longest time, up until 07 to 09, right, Israel was actually Sri Lanka's largest weapon supplier. In 07, what happens is China overtakes Israel to be the largest weapon supplier. But the thing with Sri Lanka, you have to understand, is that fucking everyone sold weapons to Sri Lanka. Everyone did. Everyone did. India did, Pakistan did, Iran did, Israel did, Czech Republic did, Slovakia did, UK did, Bulgaria did, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, France, Argentina, DPRK, Russia, Ukraine, everyone did. Everyone sold weapons to Sri Lanka, or they trained their troops. And I was talking about it yesterday. The story that I was covering yesterday, which fucking pissed me off, it still pisses me off, right? Is they are currently uncovering a mass grave in northern Jaffna in the 90s. This is from the 90s. They basically kidnapped a bunch of Tamil civilians, including children, cold-bloodedly executed them and buried them hastily in this like mass grave near Jaffna. And a couple days ago, they basically uncovered the skull of a child. And then like this is the third child that they've uncovered in that mass grave. So this is what like thing is, there is absolutely no country that is coming to help the Tamils. Everyone is against the Tamils at this point. Everyone is like fucking against us. So that's the thing. That's the
just to build off your point of Israel being at the scene of the crime. This is something that a lot of people, you know, when we talk about Israel's influence in the United States, I think a lot of people get squirrely because they're like, no, this is America. You know, it isn't the Israel lobby that's making America do this stuff. It's America is doing this stuff and using Israel. And there's this tension.
So it's a funny thing that you say that, because the reason Israel was Sri Lanka's largest weapon supplier is because America thought that because Israel basically was America's representative in this.
Correct.
Right.
That's how Israel functions. Like whenever the United States needs to do some real work, dirty work, and they are shy of even getting the CIA involved, they will turn to Israel and Mossad. So when they wanted to support South Africa during apartheid and help them get nuclear technology, which they did, which many people don't know, is that South Africa under apartheid had a nuclear weapon.
By the way, South Africa mentioned Israel. They're also involved in this.
Yeah, of course. No, of course, because this is all American empire. This is all like, oh, the American empire needs this to happen, and it looks really bad, but it's in our interest. And when I say in our interest, I don't mean in the interest of a Pennsylvania industrial worker getting imperial super profits. This isn't about unequal exchange. This is about a realpolitik American domination and the attempt to prevent any kind of alternative. The United States of America is very frightened of the idea of the power of a good example, right? They don't want to see left-wing revolution succeed because that will create an even more, it's been called domino theory, but the United States basically believes, since the Truman Doctrine, that we are to prevent any kind of left-wing nationalist or your liberatory movement from succeeding. So we will try to smash any one of them. And if it looks really bad, we will use a proxy like Israel. That's why Joe Biden said, if there wasn't an Israel, America would have to invent an Israel. That's what he was talking about. He was saying, we need Israel to do our dirty work because otherwise America would look really bad. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's actually
the very reason that Israel was Sri Lanka's largest weapon supplier for a very long time. They were acting as a proxy of the U.S. because they wanted to, because again, Israel wanted to, Israel was acting as basically America's launderers. They were acting as basically America's dirty workers, basically. I would blame India the most, despite their history of being an Islamic country. Okay, this is totally wrong. We get into how India is involved in all this, but that's actually not true at all. Like if there's one country that is the second most responsible for the Tamil genocide, aside from Sri Lanka itself, it's India.
Of course,
There's
of
no
course
question.
it is. I mean, it's the closest regional power. How could it not be? Like,
You know, the
it
funny
doesn't even
thing,
make
you'll
sense.
see India.
It couldn't happen.
You'll see India switch. Like India actually originally supported the tigers, quote unquote. They armed the tigers, they trained the tigers, sent them across the strait. But the reason they did it is because Sri Lanka was, we have the guy that co-wrote part 2 with me in the chat, PPYT 100. He is an Elam Tamil himself. So yes, India is the second most responsible for this shit. And that's basically like India's the second most responsible. A prime minister was assassinated because he sent peacekeeping forces over the strait into Iram, occupied Iram, and then they literally did war crimes like shooting up a hospital, killing 80 people, literally just mass raping children, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, it is, so, just to ask you a question that's a little topical on this. What is your feeling about Zoran and his specifically saying that he would not meet with Modi, and Modi is a war criminal on the level of Netanyahu?
He's right.
He's right, but it's like, this is a watershed moment in American politics. I think, one of the things that I'm struggling with is electoral politics is one of those things where leftists just start bashing themselves in the head with a hammer and they don't think logically. They start thinking very ironically, idealistically. And I just want people to think of politics as a way of disarming the empire. Our goal with American politics is to make America pull back and, if possible, become isolationist. That would be ideal, because America itself is the seat of capitalist power and capitalist empire. And so if we could elect people that are just like, well, we should just, we should spend money on trains or whatever the fuck, these kind of atrocities are not going to happen at anywhere near the same scale. There's this liberal belief that the United States is some sort of like stability creator that's going around and like making, things would be so much worse but for the US. Yes, the US is doing evil stuff, but it's heading off much worse evil shit. And in reality, it's the opposite. The United States is holding a lot of unstable and unjust situations in stasis with the power of our military and our diplomatic power, and our economy. We are allowing genocidal and unjust situations to exist, and we prop them up for our own advantage. And if we withdrew our support, things would collapse to a level of actually higher justice. Because,
America's involvement in this is so fucked up and pernicious that they've actually managed to get the bloc of countries that are actually at least normally opposing the US to actually take the same side as the US, because they've actually spun the entire narrative. I mean, it's a mix of, to be fair, the real reason is that someone in the chat earlier said Sri Lanka is not an important island. Swiss economist. Yeah. A Swiss analyst said back then concluded that no one cared about Sri Lanka because it's economically unimportant to the world. It's actually not true. It's the opposite.
It's not true.
It's the opposite, actually. Sri Lanka is actually extremely vital, but the reason you don't hear about it is because everyone's scrambling for it. So they're all trying to be in the good graces of the Sri Lankan government, which is why, John Kerry wrote this himself. Right, in his when he was under Obama's presidency, in the wake of 2009, he was basically saying like, we were originally pursuing a strategy of, the carrot and the stick. We were originally pursuing, hey, maybe we should, like, what Sri Lanka did is kind of fucked up. Maybe we should actually try it. People were in the American government were saying, hey, maybe we should investigate them for war crimes. And John Kerry came out and said, no, you can't do that, because we need Sri Lanka in our good graces. Yeah, they need Trincomalee Harbor. That's the reason.
Course.
It's there. Sri Lanka is
of course, empire and imperial exploitation. Of course, nothing changed. How do you think we were able to bomb Iran? We did it from Diego Garcia. Another imperial outpost that was colonized during the fucking 19th century as a coaling station, and we're now using a coaling station to bomb Iran. Like it's. The empire it never ended. It just changed branding. We instead of doing active imperial administration, we now use proxies, which is actually how the British mostly ruled India. The British mostly ruled India, not through direct governance, but through finding, local elites that they would make corrupt deals with. And
that's what they did with Sri Lanka, actually.
And that's what they do. They do that everywhere. We do it. We do it constantly. Egypt, Jordan,
the funny
Saudi
thing
Arabia.
is,
I mean, it's all the same shit. It's the same playbook.
No, the funny thing is, okay, so you want to know the funny thing about, so there's another thing about Sri Lanka or Ceylon's relationship with the UK that's actually even more, I guess, fucked up than India's relationship with the UK, or I guess not even India, but the Raj, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Ceylon was actually treated significantly better than the Raj was, because if you actually look at the rate of population growth in the 1800s under the British versus what the British were doing to India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, India, the Raj, the mainland of the subcontinent, was being starved. There were multiple famines that the British induced. Not just in Bengal, but in places like Madras and
all. Well, you have to understand, though, that was just the natural market. So you're saying induced famine. That sounds like horrible capitalist mass murder. But to me, that's just the market.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bigger point at the end of this. But Sri Lanka, Ceylon was not treated that way. Why? Ceylon was not treated the way that India was, or Pakistan was, or Bangladesh was. The reason is Sri Lanka Ceylon during the British rule was used again to specifically check India. It was used to specifically check the mainland of the subcontinent. So some of the earliest rebellions against the British, you've probably heard of figures like Bhagat Singh and later on during India's anti-colonial history, right? But actually, some of the earliest rebellions against the British actually happened in the South with the Palakkad Wars, right? So you had these small fiefdoms, and again, actually, that's where the first suicide bomb was invented. It was actually invented in Tamil Nadu, kind of, right? Because
I know that because Christopher Hitchin used to say that.
Well, they think that it was invented in Tamil Nadu, or the Tamil Tigers invented it.
I think he would say something like, because he was a anti-theist, so how he made his argument was that any religion can become violent, and he would to condemn the Tigers. Basically, he was saying they're Buddhist terrorists or something. Well, that's no, of course it's bullshit. He's a total fucking fraud. Yeah, he's a total fucking fraud, and so is the whole red wine terrorist. What's up, man?
No, but I'm talking about a history of so this is during the 1800s, long before even the idea of a Tamil nationalism.
Oh, damn, I didn't even know it was that long.
No, this is in the 1800s. So there's a queen called Velu Nachiar, which is she was the estate owner of actually my mom's hometown, which is Sivaganga. My mom is from Sivaganga district in Karaikudi, Karaikudi, the town, right?
Right.
Velu Nachiar was the ruler of that, and one of her most loyal soldiers was a woman named Veeramangai Kuili. And what she basically did was when the British came, I think, to basically loot a temple, and I'm butchering the story, but basically they came to loot some palace or temple or whatever. Basically, she put explosives all throughout the temple or all throughout the premises and just blew the British up. So that's what she did. So that's basically Kuili and Velu Nachiar and the Sivaganga estate are actually credited with inventing the first suicide bomb ever. So it wasn't. So the Tigers, the LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamariram, popularized the use of suicide bombs. Yeah, successful gunpowder plot. Exactly. They popularized the use, or they pioneered the modern use of suicide bombs. That's correct. And a lot of the more modern militant groups that we see in MENA, they were obviously probably taking notes from the LTTE, because for a very long time, the LTTE was they were probably the most successful rebel group for a long time.
Yeah.
They were very successful.
Well, right. If you'd like, we should probably get started.
Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. And then, chat, why don't you explain what we're about to watch, and then we can hit play.
So this is part 2 of a 3-part docuseries that I'm working on. So this is a docuseries called Grief-Stricken Wins. And this is basically, the long story short is, this is probably the only documentary in existence that basically documents the Tamil genocide from the standpoint, or not even from the standpoint of the Tamils, but just a more objective reading of what actually happened. If you go on YouTube and you Google Sri Lankan Civil War or Tamil genocide or anything like that, almost every single video you will come across is actually, they're actually presenting the standpoint of the Sri Lankan state. They almost all are, right? They're basically saying, no, we had this separatist problem. We had this civil war problem for 30 years. And then now everything's fine and everything's good, hunky dory. And the real problem was that these, errant terrorists were ruining everything and they were doing suicide bombs or whatever. But now, since 2009, everything's Gucci, everything's good. Right? That's the story that that's the story that most people have been presented with, right? Every time they hear anything about Sri Lanka. This is not that. This is the polar opposite of that. This is not the polar opposite of it. This is as objective basically a condensed timeline of what happened to the Tamils, or what kind of colonization the Sri Lankan government and Sinhalese Buddhist nationalists, their equivalent of Zionists, have been engaging in since 1948. And part 2 talks about the timeline between 1983 and 2009, which is the Civil War period, the armed conflict period. So there's a lot of depressing stuff, just letting you know. There's a lot of stuff in here that's very horrifying. But it's something that needs to be watched. I think more people need to watch this. I think people need to educate themselves on this, because it's the same. Like there's a lot of people saying that Israel is like unique and they've never seen anything like this. And as someone that has seen this happen go down when he was a child, I'm like, this is not the first time I've seen this exact strategy of execution and mass genocide, especially when you get to the no-fire zones. But part 2 is basically, we talk about we show the war crimes that the Sri Lankan government committed. That's basically what we're doing.
Yeah, I think people say that what Israel's doing is unprecedented. It's wrong, and it's important that you know it's wrong, because we've got to dismantle this structure. It's not just about stopping one specific instance. The United States of America is and our so-called allies are perpetuating this shit all over the world. Whether you're talking about Sudan and the protection of Israeli diamonds, Israeli-owned diamond mines, whether you're talking about Gaza with Israel perpetuating a genocide in Gaza, or whether you're talking about Sri Lanka with the Israeli-aided, genocide of the Tamil Tigers, you can see that there's a commonality here. There's a link.
Tamil people, the not people, just the Tigers.
The Tigers were the resistance group. And notice that the playbook is the same, the dehumanization is the same, and the players, the supporting cast, is also the same. Although Tamil, India being added in as an extra wrinkle because of, how else do we put this? Interesting imperialist impulse in a country before it's like India wants to spend like they're a rich country on the military and engage in imperialist behavior before they actually, develop their own country. It's pretty wild.
India's involvement is at least from one reading of it, is like they remember, you have to understand, India has its own Tamil population. I'm from the Tamil portion of India, right? So I'm from Tamil Nadu. That's where I'm from. That's where my family's from. So a lot of the stuff that India does early on is basically, it's doubly because Sri Lanka was spying on them, but it's also a move that they originally engaged in, and it's a propaganda move that worked. They basically say, they're trying to frame themselves as, oh, we care about the Tamils. We care about the Tamils a lot. We care about the Tamils in our own borders. So that's India's interest in this, because they have the largest Tamil population of any country, right? There's 70 million of us. So it's a way of, and by the way, like, we know what the fuck Sri Lanka was doing to our brethren, on the island. We know what they were doing. We know what kind of shit they were doing. And so there was mounting pressure from Tamil Nadu on India to do something about it. But then as soon as like the Indo-Lanka peace accord was signed, that shit was thrown out the window immediately. So ultimately the base thing that informed India's involvement is their economic and foreign policy interests. But no, there was also a bit of posturing involved because India has its own Tamil population that they wanted to appease. And the Tamil population in India, can I get a fuck the IPKF? Fuck the IPKF. No, they wanted to appease the Tamil population because the Tamil population in India had also like rioted against the Indian government for infringement of or cultural imperialism from the North. So it's a mix of basically pacifying the Indian population.
All right, well, why don't we get started? And if you feel like you want to provide more commentary, feel free. And I want to thank everybody for supporting the stream. Appreciate you, especially Open Presence. I want to also encourage all of you to, make sure you follow Arun, who has been described as, how have you been described? It's
Indian Hassan, Tamil Hassan.
Tamil Hassan, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I wanted you to say it because it's funnier. I've also been called. The funny thing is when people hear me. Hold on, I've been called Dash Hassan too, except it's Timu Hassan or Wish Hassan. So I think Indian Hassan is good.
People call me Indian Hassan is like when they hear my voice, just hearing me on the stream, right? I kind of sound like Hassan. Like that's the reason they were like, "Oh,
you sound
wait a minute."
Better than Hassan. Hassan is like he's a little bit higher pitched than you, in my opinion.
I mean, I know he has a bit of a higher pitch than me.
Yeah,
but I don't know if I'd say he sounds better. I think we'd sound pretty.
No, I said you sound better. You sound better than him. He's got a higher pitch. Yeah, you're Hassan's IG voice.
Okay.
All right, well, let's get this started.
All right, let's do this. Wait, we got to play this. All right, here we go.
Beautiful.
This is when the similarities with what's going on in Gaza right now really come into the forefront. Decades of war crimes committed by ethno-nationalist governments under the pretense of fighting terrorist groups. Both militant groups involved in each conflict sparked by horrendous crimes against their respective ethnic group, employing tactics such as suicide bombs, direct conflict with militaries, sabotage, and more. Propaganda from the state apparatuses then follows, justifying the use of collective punishment such as bombing schools, hospitals, and refugee camps, housing civilian population centers. The reasons? Human shields, child soldiers, heinous crimes against civilians that the militant groups committed, war on terror. Sri Lanka has it all. In order to tell the harrowing story of the Elam War, I first want to introduce you to a young Tamil woman named Isai Priya.
வணக்கம் நேர்களே 2001 ஆண்டு பிப்ரவரி மாத ஒளிவீச்சு கதிரை புதிய மெருகோடு உங்கள் கண்கள்
was a news anchor and propagandist for the rebel LTTE, aka the Tamil Tigers. She was born in 1982, a year after the burning of the Jaffna Public Library and a year before Black July and the beginning of the armed conflict period. The first decade of her life would be marked by the beginning of a full-scale war between the Tamil militant groups and the Sri Lankan government. The 1980s, Isai Priya's early childhood. This era would be marked by two major events alongside the beginning of the armed conflict. The attempted seizure of state power by the communist Janata Vimukti Perumuna, or JVP, and the intervention of and ensuing war crimes against Tamils committed by the Indian peacekeeping forces. A couple of months after Black July, in September 1983, the Mahaweli Authority of Sri Lanka transported 5,000 Sinhalese settlers, led by a Buddhist monk, into the predominantly Tamil Badikalo district in the eastern province. Another 35,000 Sinhalese settlers would soon follow, and the now 40,000 Sinhalese settlers proceeded to enter the Vadamune area and forcefully drive away local Tamil and Muslim villagers. In 1984, just 1 year after the beginning of the war, the Sri Lankan army entered the village of Manal Aru and other surrounding villages in the northern province and fired randomly at Tamil civilians. Once the hundreds of families native to this region had been killed and or displaced, their houses were set on fire. Later on, the Sri Lankan government settled ethnic Sinhalese in this town and eventually renamed the town from Manal Aru, a Tamil name, to Weli Oya, a Sinhala translation of the original Tamil name. President Jayawardena, during his tenure, increased cooperation with Israel, especially when it came to two projects: the counterinsurgency against the Tamil militant groups, and the Mahaweli colonization project. In 1984, in a press conference in Hong Kong with Western journalists, when asked on the subject of Israeli help, President J.R. Jayawardena said, quote, "We are prepared to align ourselves even with the devil to fight terrorism." That month, the Israeli interest section was opened in the U.S. Embassy in Colombo. Later that year, on June 21st, former captain of the army...
In the Israeli interest section in the U.S. Embassy, by the way.
Exactly. Yeah. American Embassy. Amazing.
Former President Jayawardena's son,
if it wasn't
Ravi,
obvious enough.
visited a Mossad agent, Amy Yar, in Israel and stayed until July 1st. At the time, Ravi was serving as a national security advisor to Sri Lanka. Ravi had also met with the head of Mossad and the Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir.
Okay, there's conflicting reports as to which prime minister was in office when he met. The one that I pulled the original document from, that Rajan Hul basically said he visited in 1984. That would mean Yitzhak Shamir was in power. There's another guy that said that no, he actually visited Shimon Peres. It's a slight detail. My guess is that we're splitting hairs at this point, but that is a doubt that I wanted to call out, and we're working on like confirming whether or not he visited this guy or Shimon Peres. But that's basically it, right? That's a bit of a detail that I wanted to make sure that we're solid on. It's a tiny detail, but
Ravi had been taken on a tour of the quote border towns and settlements in the West Bank. What's curious about this point in time is that back home on the island of Sri Lanka, until this point, no Sinhalese-dominated town on the border with LTTE-controlled areas of Tamil Eelam had been attacked by Tamil militants. It wouldn't be until May 1985 where a Sinhala-dominated town, Anuradhapura, would be attacked by Tamil militants. This is because...
Also, Anuradhapura is basically like considered to be the Sinhalese city. Anuradhapura is the basis of the Anuradhapura kingdom. So for Sinhalese Buddhist nationalists, this is the most important city. Like not even just Sinhala Buddhist nationalists, but Sinhalese people in general. This city, Anuradhapura, is like an extremely important city. It's where the Ruan Celia is. It's the cultural capital of the Sinhalese, exactly. Yes, Anuradhapura is the cultural capital of the Sinhalese, yes.
Anuradhapura would be attacked by Tamil militants. This is because up until this visit, the Sinhalese settler colonies in the northeast were not armed, which was something that Ravi Jayawardena was looking to change after seeing the armed settlements in the West Bank. The government is determined that the Sinhalese presence in the northern and eastern provinces, claimed by the Tamils as their historic homelands, shall not be diminished. Indeed, they are proposing to increase the proportion of Sinhalese in the area by establishing new settlements of southerners. The new settlers will also be armed and given weapons training. They are also likely to be recruited from prisons. The Tamils, recognizing this as a threat to the integrity of those areas, would like to make independent under the name of Eelam, are determined to fight the proposals. This new approach of arming settlements with what developed into the Home Guards would result in the Tamil Tigers' first set of massacres against Sinhalese civilians and armed settler Home Guards.
Yeah.
You create armed settlers that are constantly doing provocations, and then when the local population responds, you bring the military in, call them terrorists, and do mass retributive violence and do more evictions and move the line. This is Israeli 101.
Is it like the West Bank in Palestine?
Oh,
no.
Exactly.
So Eelam has gone through 3 different phases. So one was its West Bank phase, which predated the war.
Exactly.
That predated the war. This is 1983 to 2009 is its Gaza phase, right? And then it's flipped back to being West Bank, because now, Sri Lanka even after the war, you had settlements being built in, 2013, 2014 in Eelam, in occupied Eelam. A few of my dad's friends in high school were branded as terrorists after the Sri Lankan army killed them. My dad's friends were civilians. Yeah. Who are the Israelis in this equation? Sri Lanka. It's the Sri Lankan government and Sinhalese in particular. Those are again, not all Sinhalese people, just to be clear, but yes, the Israeli, yes, Sinhalese Buddhist nationalist is Sinhalese Buddhist nationalist is the Zionist in this equation. They're called, we call them Sin Buddhs for short, right? Sin Bud, Sinhalese Buddhist. Yeah, Sinbud is the short term for it. Sinbud.
November 1984, namely the Kenton Dollar Farm massacres. The Kenton Dollar Farms were located in northern Elam, in Muleitivu district, next to Manal Aru, later renamed Weli Oya after being settled by Sinhalese settlers. It was crucial because it was on the border between the Tamil speaker-dominated northern province in Tamil Elam and the Sinhalese-dominated north-central province in Sri Lanka. These farms were originally given by a Tamil landowner to house Malayaga Tamil refugees that fled from the 1977 anti-Tamil pogroms in the central parts of Sri Lanka. However, in June 1984, the same month Ravi Jayawardena took a tour of the armed settler colonies in the West Bank, the police in Vavuniya, led by an ethnic Sinhala superintendent of police, Arthur Herath, raided the farms and drove out the Tamils living there. He saw the farms nearby the Weli Oya colony as an obstacle to Sinhalese northern expansion. The government subsequently took the farms and settled 450 Sinhalese prisoners and their families as part of National Security Minister Lalit Atulat Mudali's plan to solve the quote Tamil problem. One of the things that the settlers would do was abduct young Tamil women from nearby into the colony and then proceed to gang rape them. Tamil women were gang raped first by security forces, then by prison guards, then by the prisoners themselves. On November 30th, 1984, 50 LTTE cadres entered the Kenton Dollar Farm massacres armed with rifles, machine guns, and grenades. One bus went to Kent Farm and the other to Dollar Farm. The LTTE fighters shot and killed the guards, then the women, the children, and the remaining male members of the families. 62 Sinhalese were brutally murdered by the LTTE, with half of them being women and a third being children. Immediately in the wake of the massacres, the Sri Lankan state kidnapped at least 100 Tamil civilian men from the surrounding areas, brought them to an army camp, and executed them. In April 1985, President Jayawardena sent former Member of Parliament M.H. Mohammed along with his supporters to attack the Tamils living in Karithivu in Ampara district. Mohammed gathered a crowd of about 3,000 men, all belonging to the Sri Lankan Muslim ethnic group hailing from Colombo district on the opposite side of the country. These men were backed by the Sri Lankan Special Task Force, trained by Israeli intelligence agencies Mossad and Shin Bet and the British Kini Mini services. We'll talk about the Special Task Force in depth very soon.
Okay, so this is where the nuance kind of begins. So this is involving the third minority on the island, right? So you have the Sinhalese, you have the Yilam Tamils. The Tamils are then further divided into Yilam Tamils and Malayaga Tamils, which is a distinction we don't have time to get into today. And then the third kind are Muslims. The third ethnic group on the island are Muslims. Now, Muslims are not, how do I say this? Muslims are not liked by the Sinhalese, the Sinhalese Buddhist nationalists. The Sinbuds also want to eradicate the Muslims, but the kind of bigotry that Muslims face is very different than the kind of bigotry that Tamils face. In that, the kind of bigotry that Muslims face on the island, like you're probably familiar as an American with Islamophobic rhetoric of, oh, these guys are terrorists, these guys are just rare, they're backwards, they're barbaric, so on and so forth. You're probably familiar with that rhetoric. Anti-Muslim bigotry in this island is extremely different in that the overwhelming majority of anti-Muslim bigotry is actually just rebranded anti-Semitism. So it's Muslims run the markets, they run the banks, they're trying to sterilize Sinhalese babies. They got prosperous just like the Jews, that sort of thing. That's the kind of pervasive rhetoric around Muslims. And the reason for that is Muslims actually especially the Muslims in the Southwest, in the Sinhalese heartland, actually are significantly more privileged than the Tamils are in a lot of respects. They're often considered to be the model minority of Sri Lanka, if that makes any sense. So what Sinhalese Buddhist nationalists will say when Tamils raise complaints of like being mistreated, being killed, these sorts of things, is like, why can't you behave like the Muslims? They're shutting up. They're learning Sinhalese. They're integrating properly. Why can't you be like the why can't you be like the Muslims? So that's the
so ironically in Sri Lanka, the Muslims are acting as like the quote model minority that is then used as justification for oppressing other minorities.
Mainly the Tamils, yes.
Yeah. See, that's and then and in different countries, Muslims are the unassimilatable group. It's so interesting how these different groups are all cast in a certain type of way depending upon the needs of the, dominant, class.
Yeah, and you'll see like the Sri Lankan government is very successful, unfortunately, and part of the blame does lie on the LTTE for this, right? Because they do play into this and they do commit atrocities against the Muslims later on. But like the Sri Lankan, starting at this point, the Sri Lankan government's goal is to completely divide any sort of resistance against the government. And the first job of the Sri Lankan government is to basically further split the Muslims from the Tamils, right? Because at this point, because at this point, both Muslims and Tamils have very similar grievances. And the other thing that, especially in Elam, both Muslims and Tamils speak Tamil. They speak Tamil as a mother tongue. For historical and political reasons, Muslims don't identify as Tamils, but they speak Tamil as a mother tongue. Most of them do. So there's a lot of commonality between the two ethnic groups. But the Sri Lankan government's goal is to basically divide and conquer. Their goal is to basically say, no, you Muslims are with us, and we're all going to, come together to kill the Tamils, basically. And one instrument that they will use to do that is by creating homegrown militias called the Home Guards, and appointing Muslims to be the leaders of some of those, appointing Muslims to be members of or leaders of some of those units. And so it's basically meant to further cement this idea of Muslims being agents of the state in the minds of Tamils. So this is the beginning of that sort of divide and conquer strat. So that's basically where this is the nuance. This is part of the nuance. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Are they ethnically the same? Muslims will tell you no, they are not ethnically the same, because Muslims, from their perspective, they have disowned their linguistic identity entirely and only identify with their religion. So that's why a lot more Muslims are more likely to be bilingual in both Sinhalese and English. Sinhalese and Tamil, rather. From the Muslim perspective, no, they're absolutely not. A lot of Tamils refuse to acknowledge the Muslims as a separate ethnic group. And that's kind of where the source of this problem begins, right? So that's kind of where the tension begins, but that's a different story for later, basically. But yeah, let's get back to this.
The 3,000-strong government-backed mob killed 11 Tamils, raped several women, and burned over 2,000 Tamil homes, rendering 15,000 Tamils homeless. Shops were also looted and several Hindu temples were destroyed, including a temple of Kanagiaman, where the statues were broken. According to Muslim journalist Qadri Ismail, who had visited the area a month earlier, even though some Tamil militants had been wrongfully engaging in extortion and abduction of Muslims since 1984, there was no evidence that the Muslims living in the area felt sufficiently threatened to resort to such violence at the time. On April 12th, Sri Lankan Member of Parliament from Muttur, Batticaloa district, A.L. Abdul Majid, accused an outside force, quote-unquote, of instigating the attacks on Tamils. The Tamils and Muslims have been living peacefully for hundreds of years. I wish to bring to your notice that certain sinister forces and self-interested parties are trying to bring about a violent clash between Tamils and Muslims. Therefore, Muslims should be vigilant. We learned that certain fake politicians are doing their damnedest to provoke a violent ethnic conflict between the Tamils and the Muslims in the eastern province, which will only result in the loss of life and property. It is important to note that Muhammad himself wasn't from Kari Thivu. He and the other 3,000 people that attacked the Tamils were from the Sri Lankan capital of Colombo. Members of the ruling United National Party, including Muhammad, placed the blame for stoking tensions between the Tamils and Muslims on Mossad. However, as mentioned earlier and as we'll elaborate later, Israeli agencies were indeed intervening in this conflict, but on the side of the UNP and the Sri Lankan government against the Tamils. Muhammad, years later, would make a claim that Israeli experts had joined the LTTE. No one to date has taken this claim seriously. Due to the
So that's the thing, right? You might hear this talking point of like, oh, Israel is involved with the LTTE. Israel is involved with the LTTE. They're derived from a book. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Viktor Ostrovsky. He wrote a book. Basically, he's a former Mossad agent that wrote an entire book about his experiences of being a Mossad agent. you can imagine what a Mossad agent would write in his book, right? It's very similar to like Chris Kyle and his like like it was the American Sniper movie where a lot of stuff is like extremely dramatized. And one of the things that was extremely dramatized was, you know, he was basically just blustering and saying, oh, well, we sold weapons to both the LTTE and Sri Lanka. That's how good we are, bro. And he was like showing about, you know, talking about vacuum cleaners and stuff. People basically read that book and are like, oh, yeah, well, what he's saying is obviously correct. Now, if you actually look at, you know, what the LTTE was involved in versus what Sri Lanka was involved in, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that that Israel was involved with the LTTE whatsoever. There's just no evidence whatsoever. But that's where people like this, they're cynically weaponizing that talking point. They're pulling out Viktor Ostrovsky's book and saying, yeah, this is what happened. It's just like, it's pure bullshit. It's pure bullshit that it's another talking point that they're pulling out just to disarm any form of consent or any form of, you know, justification for Tamil resistance, basically. Say, what role did the Veda people play in this? Are they just so small in numbers that they get ignored? No, actually, in the earlier settlements, the Sinhalese settlers actually kicked out Vedas from their homeland and put them on reservations. So no, even the Veda weren't spared. They got kicked out of the Veda in Elam got kicked out by the Sinhalese settlers and they got put on reservations. No one was spared.
Due to the active fighting that was taking place in the northeast between the Tamil militant groups and the government, settlers were far more reluctant to colonize the land on their own without the help of the Sri Lankan army or government. As a result, the Sri Lankan government started designating huge swaths of land in Tamil Elam as high security zones, or HSZs. This was to facilitate military acquisition of Tamil and Muslim land. This technique evolved out of the buffer zones and colonies that were declared around military installations throughout the Northeast in the 80s. The HSZs removed the original owners from their land and water resources and denied all civilian access, as those that were caught quote-unquote trespassing could be detained, fined, or shot and murdered on the spot. The first high security zone was created in Jaffna district, with the HSZ around Valigamam being the largest. To understand the magnitude of what's going on, the total area of Jaffna district amounts to 660 square kilometers, or 254 square miles, just a bit smaller than New York City by area. Within the 660 square kilometers, 220 square kilometers amounting to 1/3 of the district were made of high security zones, completely inaccessible to local Tamils. Once again, the Sri Lankan state suppression of Tamils has resemblance to the Israeli strategies of colonization of Palestinian land, with the HSZ resembling the Israeli policy of zoning around sensitive areas. Of the numerous HSZs and...
By the way, these HSZs, high security zones, still exist. They have not been dismantled yet. Valigamam has not been dismantled yet. In big 2025, by the way. They still exist. So there's still military occupation, like here. Just letting chat know.
Jaffna, the Valigamam North High Security Zone is the biggest and one of the longest sustained military zones on the island. Prior to the beginning of the war, there were roughly 84,000 Tamils comprising 25,000 families, where livelihoods were primarily dependent on 30% fishing and 60% farming. When the expansion of the Palali Air Base and the KKS Naval Base began in 1983, the Sri Lanka Armed Forces stole 6,000 acres of land from the surrounding villages. They then proceeded to ban fishing and proceeded to fire shells into the surrounding villages at night to terrorize the people into leaving the area. These people who left their villages that were turned into high security zones were then designated as internally displaced persons, or IDPs. It was also around this time the Sri Lankan Special Task Force, an elite police unit that received extensive training from the British Kinimini services, started to engage in operations in the Tamil-dominated northern province. In particular, there was an operation that they engaged in at Point Pedro near Jaffna, wherein the LTTE ambushed the Special Task Force using landmines and killed 5 to 6 of their elite members. In response,
the survivors then set out on a revenge mission, described in this declassified document.
10 civilians were killed by police commandos. There was a random shooting at Point Pedro town.
The army joined in the carnage, and together with the STF, they burnt down Point Pedro's historic Hartley College Library.
My age is 1994. I was a maths teacher. In 1984, the library was burnt. There is about more than 2,000 books, valuable books, everything burnt.
The Special Task Force would become more animalistic and brutal over the next several years as they continued receiving training from the Kiini-Mini services.
There's a record of missing people from deep villages. They would come. My husband has disappeared, my son has disappeared. By whom? SDF. People have been killed. They're just ordinary poor people who earn their living hand to mouth. They would take the person, if there are many persons, tie them together and tire over them and burn the tire. So the body is burnt completely.
This is called necklacing, chat.
So that's what happened. Everywhere, tire.
Were many of these people who were burnt
Civilians. They are not terrorists or militant groups. They didn't belong to any LTT or anything. Ordinary citizens.
The Special Task Force went into very deep and rural areas of Elam, kidnapped random villagers struggling to make ends meet, forced tires drenched in gasoline around their chests and arms, and set them on fire, burning the villagers alive in a form of extrajudicial execution known as necklacing. But what the Special Task Force was about to...
By the way, the first recorded instance of necklacing, not in South Africa, not done by the ANC. It was actually done in Sri Lanka in 1958. The first, as far as I know, the first recorded instance of necklacing, which is basically you drench a tire, foist it onto someone, and then burn both of them alive. Right? You drench the tire in like gasoline, and you basically burn them alive, burn the person alive. That was first recorded in Elam in Sri Lanka by Sinhalese nationalist mobs.
Yeah, there's no nationalism breeds this kind of violence.
There have been
That's why
also,
it's bad.
There is also an instance. I didn't talk about this earlier because I only learned about it afterwards. But there were reported instances of Tamils who had been during Black July. So this is the thing that preceded this video, right? Everything in this video, Black July. It's the anti-Tamil pogrom. During that week, there were reported instances of Tamils being beheaded and their limbs being chopped off, and those body parts being sold on butcher stalls as Tamil meat. Like cannibalism is the implication here. So it'll be in the director's cut of this and the definitive edition of this, because I only learned it after I released part 1, or after I released part 2 actually. But again, you're about to see some shit in this video that you might think it's far-fetched, but once you see the full video, you'll realize it's not a far-fetched claim to make. It's not a far-fetched claim to believe that people were engaging in cannibalism. It's not a crazy thing to believe.
Next, outdid the previous heinous acts of violence on civilians.
அதிகாலை 5 மணிக்கு நாங்கள் படுத்து கொண்டிருக்கின்ற போது வெடிச்சத்தங்கள் கூடுதலாக கேட்டுக்கொண்டிருந்தது. அப்பொழுது சனமெல்லாம் ஓடி வந்து வளமையாக கூறுகின்ற போது ஆமி வருகின்றான், நாங்கள் ஓட வேண்டும், மாற வேண்டும் என்கின்ற சத்தம் போட்டு ஜனங்கள் எல்லாம் கூறிக்கொண்டிருந்தது. ஏர்போர்ட்ஸ் அதில் வந்து ஆமியையும் நேவியையும் ஏற்றி வந்து எஸ்டிஎவையும் ஓடத்து இறக்குனாங்க. இந்த ஏரியாவில் ஜனங்கள் வராமல் இருக்கிறதுக்கு முதல் அங்கால ரவுண்ட் அப் பண்ணி ஜனங்களுக்கு அங்கே ஃபயரிங் கொடுக்க ஜனம் எல்லாம் ஓடி இங்கே வந்து சேர்ந்தாங்க. இந்த பாம்பு கூட வந்தோடனே எல்லாரையும் கொலை செய்து விட்டு இந்த பொடியை
85 civilians were shot down by Sri Lankan forces on this day of bloodshed.
The Special Task Force, along with the Sri Lankan army, chased civilians out of their homes, herded them into a farm, and shot all of them dead. 85 civilians died that day, but the situation would only become worse for the Tamil civilians.
And a South African helicopter pilot was explaining one of his experiences. And he told me that he'd been responding to a vehicle ambush where a Sinhalese vehicle, a Sri Lankan vehicle, had been blown up by a road mine. And he flew over it to give it air cover, in a Huey Bell helicopter. As he flew over the area, his door gunner opened up and shot every man, woman, child and animal that he could get his eyes on. And in response to that, he flew the helicopter much higher to prevent him from doing that. But there were no recriminations for that action. It was considered to be perfectly acceptable by those people that were in charge of that group.
செலி வந்து சுத்தவரை சுட்டு கொண்டிருக்க ஜனமெல்லாம் ஓடி வந்து பங்கர்களுக்குள்ளான் போடுறாங்க. என்னோட தங்கச்சி இந்த பிள்ளை தங்கச்சி மறுபடியும் மூச்சடக்கி இருக்க கொண்டு ஓடி போனது. பங்கருக்குள்ளே வச்சிருந்து தூக்கினாப்புல அப்படியே மூச்சு தண்ணி அப்படியே மூச்சு நேரம் வீட்டுக்கு வேலை போனது போட்டுட்டு போயிடுவாங்க. அப்படி நடந்தது. வருதுண்டா ஓடி 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 ஒழிக்கிறது ரோட்டுக்கு விதையிடாது கண்ணை நடிச்சிடுவாங்க.
One KMS pilot, Tim Smith, he has said that he opened fire on a school and that he opened fire on a bus full of civilians.
You read his book, have you? Yeah.
Have you as well?
Yes.
What's funny?
Those are war crimes.
Those are war crimes, yeah.
The Keeny Meeny services had hired pilots from the UK, apartheid South Africa, and Rhodesia to pilot planes armed with machine guns that members of the Sri Lankan Special Task Force would then use to open fire into villages and slaughter people en masse.
Anonymous, thank you for the 10 tier 1 gifts. Holy shit. Thank you. Thank you so much for the 10 tier 1 gift subs.
A lot of what is considered to be like the qualitative superiority of the forces that are committing genocide is directly related to the capabilities that are being given to them by American, British, Rhodesian, South African. You know what I mean? Like, that's what it's so interesting.
Everyone in this case, yeah.
It is.
No, like,
they can't actually do this genocide without outside assistance because they wouldn't have the capability. They need the capability that's being granted from outside.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example of how fucking incompetent the Sri Lankan army is. Okay. So it was like just recently Sri Lanka had bought a training jet from China for like 900 million rupees, like $3 million or something, right? Within 3 months, they broke it. They broke a $3 million jet from China in 3 months. That's where Sri Lankan taxpayer money is going. Sri Lanka is a heavily militarized country even today. That's how incompetent the army is.
Yeah. I mean, like, a lot of these capabilities are extremely expensive and hard to maintain. I mean, hell, we can barely maintain it.
Right. So, like, it goes to show you, like the reason that the Sri Lankan government won, and you'll see this later in the doc, is because basically during the ceasefire, everyone was flooding Sri Lanka with weapons. Everyone was flooding Sri Lanka with weapons. Everyone was trying to tip the scale in favor of the Sri Lankan army. Yeah, literally. No, PPYT is right. The Sri Lankan army literally needed the entire world to carry them to help them defeat the LTTE. And you'll see like how crazy good the LTTE was in terms of fighting. They were ruthless. They did a lot of fucked up shit. And again, they did a lot of fucking mistakes. There's no question about that. But they were a fucking really effective force. Like, yeah, the LTTE had way fewer. The LTTE had a fucking air force. They had an air force and a navy. Like, they bought almost all their fucking weapons on the black market. Holy shit. Did someone give me... Oh my God, open presents. Thank you for the 100. Holy shit.
Let's go. All right, let's keep it going. Let's keep it flowing.
Holy shit.
We got a lot of ground to cover.
These raids, an untold number of Tamil civilians were slaughtered. In addition to that, the Keeny Meeny services and Special Task Force developed an unusual form of war crime.
According to Lieutenant Colonel Holworthy, the KMS pilots had another unorthodox tactic.
Initially, actually, they're talking about bombing from helicopters and thought it was completely impossible. But what they did is they had the old 36 grenade, the Mills grenade, and they pulled the pin out, but kept the and put the grenades into wine glasses, with the wine glass holding the lever,
and then it fly over and drop the wine glass with the grenade in it. Of course, when it hit the ground, the glass broke, the grenade exploded. And I know this was happening because when I went to Trincomalee one day, and there were no wine glasses at all. The whole bloody lot had been dropped on the Tamils with grenades inside them.
The man who was ultimately in charge of the Keeny Meeny services who trained the Special Task Force was none other than Lieutenant Colonel Brian Beatty.
Hello? Yes, you can bugger off.
Are you Lieutenant Colonel Beatty?
You can bugger off.
Are you Brian Beatty, sir?
You can bugger off.
Can I ask you some questions about your time with KMS in Sri Lanka?
No.
Serious allegations,
bugger
sir.
Off. You're on my land. Get over.
I've listened to you, sir, as a journalist. You're being linked to war crimes in Sri Lanka, sir. Do you have any comments about these allegations, sir? Were you the most senior KMS man in Sri Lanka?
If that name sounds familiar, that is because he is the very same person who commanded the Special Air Services Squadron in southern County Armagh in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. In fact, the connections between the Sri Lankan Special Task Force and the Troubles in Northern Ireland go even deeper. The Special Task Force was set up months after an incident in County Armagh where an armed UK police squad shot 6 unarmed civilians dead whom the UK government had accused of being members of the Irish Republican Army and Irish National Liberation Army. Brian Beatty's Keeny Meeny Services' first batch of Special Task Force personnel reportedly included a man by the name of Kapila Jayasekara, who went on to command the Special Task Force unit that shot 5 innocent Tamil students dead in the city of Trincomalee in 2006. Beatty died in May 2020 at the age of 86, without facing any form of accountability for the war crimes he helped commit in Elam against the Tamils. The 1980s in particular was a time when the brutality against the Tamil civilians was already burgeoning. Massacres had already started during this era, especially at the hands of the Special Task Force. It was also during this decade, specifically 1986, that the Home Guards, the predecessor to the Sri Lanka Civil Defense Force, were established by the state. The Home Guards were primarily Sinhala dominated, with some notable units being run by the Tamil-speaking Muslim minority of Sri Lanka. These units in particular were armed by the government as a divide and conquer strategy, with the government using these Muslim-run Home Guards to further drive a wedge between the Tamil and Muslim communities, especially in the east. India was originally on the side of the Tamil militant groups in Sri Lanka. Over the course of nearly 4 years, India's intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, aka RAW, had provided arms, training, and monetary support to 6 Tamil militant groups, including the LTTE. However, this position that they held was not to last, as within the next few years, they would ultimately switch sides, taking the side of the Sri Lankan government in its onslaught against the Tamil militants and the Tamil population as a whole. India, having the largest Tamil population of any country at roughly 70 million in the state of Tamil Nadu, defined its foreign policy in Sri Lanka throughout the past several decades by balancing its own state interests with making sure that the Tamils of Tamil Nadu, who were keenly aware of the atrocities being committed towards their brethren by the Sri Lankan government across the strait, remained satisfied and/or pacified, at least in theory. A couple of decades earlier, Indian Tamils were far more inclined towards separatism due to the Indian government's attempt at North Indian cultural imposition by replacing English as a link language with Hindi in schools, government offices, banks, and other institutions in Tamil Nadu. This is similar to what the Sri Lankan government did with the Sinhala language. In response to the threat of Hindi imposition, Tamils in India rioted in the streets and threatened to secede from India. Some even self-immolated in protest. The Indian government thus effectively retreated from Hindi imposition and allowed Tamil Nadu to officially continue with the two-language policy of Tamil being the official language of the state and English being the language of inter-ethnic communication. Thus, in order to remain in the good graces of the Indian Tamils, India thought it best to take the side of the Tamil militant groups. There is another, far more important reason as to why the Indians originally took the side of the Tamil militants, which will resurface later, and it's regarding.
Okay, I don't talk about it in this part. First off, open presents. Holy fuck. Thank you for the, 400, I think? 400 gift subs? Holy shit. Thank you. Thank you. I spent like 8 months working on this. So to be some level, like to 500. Yeah, 500. Holy shit. Thank you. Appreciate it. I like from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. 500. Yeah, 500. Holy shit. Thank you so much. Making this was, I have to be honest with you, it was one of the loneliest experiences I've faced. It was one of the worst So like just you had to look at I had to look at a lot of like war crime footage for like 8 months, like you know, and it was just harrowing, right? So getting some level of like recognition for this is, you know, or getting like not even getting some level of recognition, getting the word out there, right? Just getting the word out there about this and how like this is interconnected with everything is like it getting like people being able to learn about this is like, yeah, the YouTube version is censored, by the way. Grief-Stricken.com is the website that I put up, right? This is the website. I'm going to work on this a lot more. But we are going to, I mean, this is the uncensored footage, so nothing is blurred here. This is actually not blurred. Okay, so to the point that I wanted to talk about here. I don't talk about it here, but like I mentioned earlier in the stream, the reason that India funds the Sri Lanka, the Tamil militant groups to begin with, is because of America. This is the Cold War. Yeah. The U.S. is allied with Jayawardena's administration in Sri Lanka, right? And India is allied with the Soviets at this point in time. Technically, both part of the non-aligned movement, but let's be honest, Sri Lanka under Jayawardena is allied with the U.S. India is allied with the Soviets. So America had just built a Voice of America radio tower in Sri Lanka to spy on India and the Soviets. So India didn't like that. So they're like, they basically trained the Tamil militant groups as a pressure tactic against the Sri Lankan government. That's basically the main reason why India originally starts funding the Tamil militant groups, because it's a pressure tactic against basically Sri Lanka and like basically the US spying on India and the Soviets via this proxy, basically. So that's why I don't talk about it here. I talk about it in part 3, because part 3, I actually tabulate and go through each and every single thing, what each country did, how they were involved in Sri Lanka, how they were involved in this genocide. So I don't talk about it here. I've saved a lot of India's involvement in India's war crimes for part 3, right? But this under Indira Gandhi. No, Rajiv Gandhi. Not both Indira and Rajiv Gandhi. Yes. India had aligned with the Soviet. No, India had allied with the Soviets long before because of basically food problems, basically. And the Soviets were the ones that gave Indians food unconditionally. The West didn't. The West told India to fuck off. So India has been allied with the Soviets for a long time. Okay, that's the point that I want to talk about. We'll get back.
And it's regarding the fact that this was during the Cold War. And while both India and Sri Lanka were part of the non-aligned movement, India was unofficially allied with the USSR, while Sri Lanka under Jayawardena was unofficially allied with the United States. In 1987, under Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, the Indian Air Force engaged in Operation Pumale, where they airdropped supplies to the LTTE over Jaffna, which was under siege by the Sri Lankan army. This was a show of force by the Indian government which drew the ire of the Sri Lankan government under President Jayawardena, who accused the Indian government of violating Sri Lankan sovereignty. Faced with the possibility of further Indian intervention, Sri Lankan President Jayawardena offered to hold talks with the Indian government.
We need the sympathy of the world, we need the support of India.
These talks led to the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord, which was expected to end the war by outlining several conditions. The main concession expected from the Sri Lankan state was that power was to be devolved to the provincial level, and thus a new constitutional amendment, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka, was to be enacted. The 13th Amendment introduced provincial councils, which would give the provinces
Provincial councils function, but nominally. So the story to take away from 13th Amendment is it's basically useless. It didn't do anything other than instituting Tamil as an official language of Sri Lanka. It did nothing. It is the provincial councils that they set up are completely hollowed out. They're completely subservient to the Sri Lankan government. Everything, including the cops, by the way, and land administration, is directly administered by the central government, which is, again, majority Sinhalese Buddhist nationalist. It's majority Sinhalese Buddhist nationalist. So all of this is completely useless. Like they implemented it on paper. They did it. India pushed for this. Yeah. And India still pushes for this. Now, the funny thing is, even though the 13th Amendment is completely useless, the vast majority of Sri Lankans, especially Sinhalese, especially the Sinhalese, think that the 13th Amendment is a step too far. 13th Amendment is a watered down amendment saying, hey, Tamils should have, devolution of power. They should have rights. They should have the ability to administer themselves, right? Within a Sri Lankan framework. That's the 13th Amendment. Nothing is fundamentally changing other than, hey, these people have rights. They can self-govern and they can police themselves. Nothing, right? There is basic. It's like having Indian states, or it's like having American states. It's like having subdivisions to self-govern. That's it. But even this is a step too far for Sri Lankans, especially the Sinhalese. They think, no, this is they think that the 13th Amendment is effectively tantamount to terrorism.
Yeah.
That's people ask me, oh, why can't you work with a federal solution? Why can't you, are you hell bent on basically saying free Elam? Why can't there be a federal solution? Sri Lankans don't want this. What do you mean? The Sri Lankans don't want this. They don't want a federal solution whatsoever. They are saying this is a step too far. Giving Tamils any form of devolution is a step too far. So this is like completely useless. Like this is a completely useless piece of amendment. That's it. That's all this is.
Legislative power over agriculture, education, health, housing, local government, planning, road transport, and social services. The other two sectors that provincial councils are in theory supposed to have domain over are land administration and policing. But to this day, the Sri Lankan government has refused to fully implement this. The 13th Amendment also finally introduced official status for the Tamil language, with English being the link language between the Tamil-speaking communities and the Sinhala-speaking community. The main concession expected from the side of the Tamil militants and the Indian government was that the Tamil militants were to disarm completely and there was to be a complete cessation of hostilities. Every Tamil militant group complied with this concession except for one, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Elam, or the LTTE. The LTTE, despite themselves being trained by the Indian intelligence agency RAW, ultimately saw the Indian state as self-serving. That is, they saw that the Indian state wasn't actually interested in the well-being of the Tamils on the island and were doing it to further their own geopolitical interests. As a result, they were not a part of the Indo-Sri Lanka peace talks. The Indian government, in order to uphold their end of the bargain and guarantee the cessation of hostilities in the Tamil-dominated provinces, deployed the Indian peacekeeping forces. The Indian peacekeeping forces tried to force a surrender from the LTTE, but due to the strategic advantage the LTTE had fighting on their home turf and their refusal to accept anything less than a free Tamil Elam, the Indian peacekeeping forces ended up mired in active conflict with the Tigers. It was at this point in time that the Tamil Tigers effectively became the last remaining militant group fighting for any form of Tamil autonomy, let alone a free Elam. This is one of the reasons the LTTE to this day remains incredibly popular among both the Tamil diaspora population and locally within Sri Lanka. Despite all the war crimes the LTTE committed, they were indeed the last line of defense for the Tamils against both the Sri Lankan government and now the Indian government. The Indian peacekeeping forces predictably also engaged in heinous war crimes against the Tamil civilian population, making India the only other country whose soldiers also directly committed war crimes against the Tamils. We'll touch upon this later in the documentary. In 1989, the longest-serving prime minister at the time, Ranasinghe Premadasa, was elected as president. He served as prime minister under the Jayawardena administration. Premadasa, unlike many of his contemporaries, didn't come from an elite family like the Bandaranayakas, who ran the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, or the Jayawardena or Senanayaka family, who ran the United National Party. What's even more significant is that he became the first prime minister, and later first president, that didn't come from the Govigama landlord caste, and in fact, till today, he would be one of the few leaders to not come from the Govigama caste. 1990. Our window into the war zone, Isaipriya, would turn 8 years old. Originally from Nedundiva, aka Delft Island, she would later become an internally displaced person due to the second phase of the Elam War starting in the 90s and the increased Sri Lankan military presence in the region. On June 18, 1990, the Sri Lankan army abducted 13 civilians off the roads of Vidamune in Ampara district in the eastern province. These 13 Tamil civilians were then forcibly disappeared. A couple of days later, the Sri Lankan army ordered the residents of the village to assemble at the local temple. Anyone who remained at home was shot on sight and killed. Once all the people gathered at the temple, the army singled out every male over the age of 15. 69 young men were detained in front of their families and then transported to a Muslim school or madrasa in nearby Samandurai. The army then proceeded to torture them, and 50 young men out of the 69 died, with their bodies disposed of in a nearby forest. 9 days later, this exact same act would be repeated by the Sri Lankan army with the help of the Muslim-run Home Guards, with another 56 boys being disappeared by the state. In the wake of all of this, many people sought refuge in the Karithiva Mahavidyalayam school. Over the following month of July, the army and the Muslim-run Home Guards would continue to abduct innocent Tamils and disappear them. The examples I'll list here are ones that are more notable. On July 5th, the military abducted another 13 men, tortured them, and subsequently necklaced them by tying them to tires doused with gasoline and burning them alive. On July 11th, 13 women visited the town of Savalakare to search for their disappeared children. The army stationed there then abducted the women and disappeared them. On July 16th, 8 women who had left the refugee camp to check on their homes were arrested at a checkpoint. They were gang raped by more than 30 Sri Lankan soldiers. They were then killed and their bodies were set on fire. On July 29th, 8 school teachers who were traveling with their families from the refugee camp were arrested and then subsequently disappeared. On August 1st, 18 civilians, including a baby, were arrested by the military and Muslim-run Home Guards while passing on Savalakadai Road. The military and Home Guards murdered them all with sharp weapons, and their bodies were disposed of inside of a Hindu temple and set on fire. On August 12th, after the LTTE attacked and seriously injured 2 innocent Muslim farmers, Muslim-run Home Guards entered the Veeramune refugee camp and attacked the refugees. 10 civilians died, including 2 infants, with 1 child's corpse being chopped into 3 pieces. The injured people that managed to escape fled to Samandurai Hospital and were subsequently denied treatment. One of the injured that were denied treatment was a child, who died after being refused water. The injured then had to be transported into the larger Ampara Hospital, but as they arrived, so did the Sri Lankan army, who then abducted 3 of the 7 victims who were injured and disappeared them. The army then killed a 17-year-old boy by disconnecting the necessary IV fluid from him. The Telugu community of the island are a minuscule population, numbering at most at about 4,000. Telugus originate in what is now India, in the states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. They speak a Dravidian language, Telugu, thus making them culturally and linguistically cousins of the Tamils. They, by and large, stayed out of the civil war as much as they possibly could, due to the fact that they could very easily have been annihilated by the larger political forces on the island. The vast majority of Telugus on the island had lived in Badikalo and Ampara districts in the east, settled around the town of Alikampai near Akaripattu. This community has traditionally survived on snake charming and some cultivation of land. Despite wanting to live simple lives, the Grim Reapers that are the Sri Lankan state and its forces ultimately came knocking on the Telugu community's door. On August 7, 1990, just after the Telugu community had helped members of the Muslim community harvest their fields, Muslim-run Home Guards and hooligans came to Alikambai in 18 tractors and other vehicles. Alphonsus, a Roman Catholic priest and one of the few educated members of the Telugu community, was dragged out of his home and taken away, and was never seen again. A man named Yerana and his wife, Arya Malar, who had a young infant, were just preparing to eat when the attackers came in. One of them swung at them with a harvesting knife, injuring both husband and wife. He was stopped by another Muslim from proceeding further. Yerana attributes this to the presence of the baby. Arya Malar's cousin, Krishnam was killed in the attack. Sankaran, another Telugu man, was cut in one eye and as a result permanently lost sight in that eye. Vile Munayan, an elderly man, suffered a deep cut in his head and his back and is now mentally abnormal. In total, 7 were killed and 12 were badly injured before the attackers left at 1 p.m. As a result of this attack, many of the Telugus fled Alikambai as refugees and resettled further southeast next to Tirukovil in the town of Kaliyantivu. The Telugu community were attacked by these home guards because the Tamil Tigers had attacked several Muslims prior. However, the Telugu community had no affiliation whatsoever with the Tigers. They simply wanted to live their lives. However, the Sri Lankan state spared no one in this conflict, not even the tiny minority of Telugus. On September 9th, the Sri Lankan army entered a village named Satrukondan near Badikalo and ordered everyone to enter the main road. They were then marched into the army camp, saying that they would be questioned and then promptly let go thereafter. 50 commandos walked about 150 of us to the army camp, which we reached at about 7 or 8 p.m. 4 were separated from the rest, attacked with swords and crisp knives, and were pulled away out of the camp. All were then taken to one place, attacked, and burnt with tires. Kandaswamy Krishnakumar, the person that said that, was the only survivor among 185 civilians. The other 184, including elderly, women, children, and infants, were necklaced and burned alive by the Sri Lankan army and the Home Guards. Although there were 2 government investigations into this massacre, no one was ever charged. Initially, the LTTE's policy in the East was to continue their long-standing cordial relations with the Muslim community. However, in the wake of the anti-Tamil pogrom in Karithivu in 1985, led by M.H. Mohammed, tensions between the Tamils and the Muslims were much higher at the ground level. At this point in time, the LTTE in the East was under the command of Bashir Kaka and later Kumarappa, both of whom came from the North. The relations between the Tamils and Muslims in the North were far better than they were in the East. Bashir Kaka and Kumarappa, not wanting to endanger the LTTE's relationship with the Muslim community, gave little heed to Eastern Tamil grievances regarding the crimes committed against them, such as the Karithivu pogrom in 1985, or the war crimes committed by the government-backed Home Guards, who happened to be headed by Muslims. Furthermore, during the Indian peacekeeping forces' presence on the island, especially in the east, the Tigers relied on Muslim support in order to maintain their influence in the area. However, even after the Indian peacekeeping forces left Sri Lanka altogether, the LTTE saw the emerging Sri Lankan Muslim Congress Party as collaborators of the Indian government and thus traitors to the Tamil nationalist cause, which led them to favor the Muslim United Liberation Front, or MULF, as a counterweight to suppress the Muslim Congress's grassroots initiatives. This, however, ended up backfiring and led to even greater tensions between the Tamils and Muslims in the East. By 1988, the leadership of the LTTE in Badikalo had been taken over by Tamils from the East, who at this point were far less cordial with the Muslim community. On August 3, 1990, Tamil militants disguised as Muslims, likely from the LTTE, raided several mosques in the town of Kathankudi in Badikalo district at around 8:10 p.m. when the Muslims were offering Isha prayers. The Muslim civilians were kneeling in prayer when the militants attacked them by shooting the civilians in the back, using automatic rifles and throwing hand grenades at them. Initial reports put the death toll at about 100, but many of the injured that were rushed to the hospital succumbed to their injuries, raising the death toll to 147. Among the dead were children as young as 6 and elderly as old as 70.
Yes. FYI, the founder of the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress used to be a member of TALF, the Tamil political party that called for a separate Tamil. So the thing is, yeah, a lot of the people that are now, you can kind of say like Ashraf, who is the leader of the Muslim Congress, he kind of sold out to the government. You can kind of say that. As a lot of people, not just Muslims, but a lot of Tamils would later sell out to the government. Karuna is a great example. Like that's so. But what is like what is happening here is, again, one of the LTTE's biggest blunders, and it's leading to another blunder from the LTTE, which basically severed the relationship between the Tamils and the Muslims for generations. Like the Kathankudi and Yeravur mosque massacres that the LTTE claims that they didn't do it, but let's be honest, who else was there? And then the second thing is the exodus of the Muslims. So those are the two biggest blunders that the LTTE committed. Yes, the Muslims were wielded against Tamils to further divide. Yes, while a majority of Muslims simply wanted coexistence. Yeah, most Muslims want to retain their identity, right? They want to maintain their Muslim identity, which the original Vatukote resolution that called for a separate Tamil would have ensured that. So they were engaging in divide and conquer, basically. The Sri Lankan government was, and the LTTE played into that divide and conquer and committed heinous atrocities against the Muslims. Indian ISIS, dude, stop bringing ISIS into this. I don't know what that has to do with anything. Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing here. Yeah, the LTTE's reaction to the Muslim Home Guards was not measured and very emotionally charged reactionary. Exactly. It was literally reactionary in this case. It was a huge, horrific crime that they committed against the Muslims that would permanently sever the relationship forever, or at least for generations.
That's
the
why
LTTE
violence often leads to a nihilistic spiral, of escalating blood feud. And so, people start, there's some atrocity, and then if there's nothing done to arrest it, people retaliate. And they feel justified in their retaliation, and that justifies further retaliation, and you get these spirals of violence that continue to grow.
Yeah, exactly. The conditions that the LTTE and the Tamils and the Muslims were put in by the Sri Lankan government, the blame ultimately, if we were to blame one, are the LTTE firmly reactionary in ideology now? I forget. No, well, the LTTE are dead. So the LTTE are dead. So that's number one. They're dead now. If you were to blame one group of people for this madness that you're seeing unfolding right before you, it's the Sri Lankan government. It's the Sri Lankan state that's responsible for this. And I think people need to realize that none of this would have happened had there been any sort of concessions given to minorities. But again, Sri Lanka is a settler colonial apartheid state. They were never going to give any sort of concessions to the minorities. They're hell-bent. Is the Sri Lankan state Muslim? No, they're Buddhist. Sri Lanka is majority Buddhist. But they used Muslims as a counterinsurgent population against the Tamils, basically. And the thing is, originally, as PPYT 100 said, originally early on, Muslims joined the LTTE. They joined various Tamil militant organizations because early on, and as always, Tamils and Muslims have very similar grievances against and even today, they have very similar grievances against the Sri Lankan state. They're both victims of Sinhala Buddhist nationalism. They're both victims of Sinhala Buddhist nationalism. And to say like LTTE firmly reactionary in ideology now, no. LTTE's main thing was we want separate Tamilam at all costs. That's it. To say that LTTE had like had this really cohesive ideology, given the fact they were put into this situation and they had to constantly adapt to the situation, is just wrong, right? They didn't have like a full-blown, fully thought out ideology. They were a response. They were basically a response to increasingly horrific conditions that the Tamils that the Tamils were put in by the Sri Lankan government. So yeah. Yes, in a sad but also heartwarming and Trincomalee, when Tamils were wailing about missing people in a recent UN visit, Muslim people were standing with them. Yeah, exactly. I think that things between the Tamils and the Muslims are going to heal slowly, but it's going to take a lot of effort from both communities. As far as reconciliation between both communities and the Sinhalese, I don't think that's going to happen anytime. I think we've reached you'll see why. I don't think there's any real reconciliation happening. But this is, again, we're going to get into extreme nuance here. This is basically it. So let's lock in.
This day, deny any responsibility for the attack. Nonetheless, this horrific massacre of innocent Muslim civilians by Tamil militants would be one of many event horizons between the Tamil and Muslim communities. Relations between the Tamil and Muslim communities of the East would be gravely damaged for decades, and this would soon be followed by the destruction of relations between the Tamils and Muslims living in the North. Many Muslims today in the East understandably see this as a deep wound caused by the Tamil community. It is important to realize, however, that many Tamils living in Badikalo district at the time were horrified by the actions of these militants, as Tamils and Muslims had been coexisting for centuries prior. In October 1990, as a response to the war crimes committed against Tamil civilians by the ethnically Muslim-run Home Guard units, the LTTE engaged in an ethnic cleansing campaign against the Muslims living in the northern province. Due to the Veeramune massacres, along with other war crimes that the Muslim-run Home Guards committed against the Tamils alongside the Sri Lankan state, the LTTE viewed the Muslim community in their entirety as collaborators of the Sri Lankan state, and therefore an integral part of the campaign against them and the Tamil community. On October 24th at 4 p.m., an announcement was made on loudspeaker on the island of Mannar. All Muslims living in Mannar Island should leave by 28th October. Before leaving, they must seek permission and clearance at the LTTE office. The LTTE will decide their exit route. Many Tamils living in Mannar at the time were utterly disturbed by this proclamation. A meeting of local Tamil citizens was arranged the following day, which consisted of Roman Catholic clergy, officials from the Save the Children Fund, and other citizens. Following this meeting, a delegation went to see the local Tiger leader Suresh and asked for the order to be rescinded. Suresh told the delegation that it was out of the control of the LTTE contingent running Mannar. The Roman Catholic clergy that was there pressed the matter, further demanding to know who was behind the order, to which Suresh revealed that it was the contingent from Badikalo, the district where relations between Tamils and Muslims had deteriorated the most, that was responsible for the order. Suresh had also followed up with the fact that it was an order from the leader Prabhakaran himself, and that the decision was unalterable. The Tamils living in Mannar were forbidden from trading with Muslims, and the Muslims were allowed to leave with at most 2,000 rupees. On the morning of October 30th in Jaffna City, an announcement was made on loudspeaker ordering all Muslims to assemble at Osmania Stadium. The meeting was addressed by 2 LTTE leaders, with one of them having been in charge of operations in Badikalo. They told the Muslims that assembled at the stadium that they were to leave Jaffna within 2 hours. They were snidely told that they could go to quote-unquote their leader Ashraf, aka the founder of the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress Party, who would provide them with food and shelter in the Ampara and Badikalo districts in the eastern province. The LTTE told them that no harm would be done to them in the same way that Muslims had in the east done to Tamils through looting, killing, and rape, and that their lives were granted as a mercy. They were allowed to take at most 500 rupees. Muslims living in the northern province had their property ransacked and confiscated by the LTTE. Some of the property included vital documents such as property deeds. A tigress started removing the ear studs of a Muslim girl, and after getting impatient with removing one stud, ripped the other stud from the ear, leaving the girl with a torn, bloody ear. In total, around 72,000 Muslims living in the northern province were expelled by the LTTE. By the beginning of November, there were effectively no Muslims remaining in the northern province, most of them having been resettled in Puttalam in the northwestern province, which was under the control of the Sri Lankan government. To this day, many of the northern Muslims that were resettled in Puttalam are living on minimal welfare assistance from the Sri Lankan government. Many have tried to resettle in the northern province to no avail due to the Sri Lankan army seizing much of the homes that the Muslims used to live in. The Sri Lankan government, despite weaponizing the atrocities that the LTTE committed against the Muslims, has refused to help the Muslims forcibly exiled to Puttalam. As mentioned earlier, it is important to note that the LTTE's forced expulsion of the Muslims from the northern province, even back then, was not all that well received by many of the Tamils living there, who actually tried to help the Muslims but were prevented by the LTTE from doing so. Even though there were many Tamils who eventually came to agree with the LTTE's order, many of the Tamils who also supported the LTTE's position as their liberators viewed the Muslims as simply their neighbors and part of the overall community, and were horrified by the expulsion. 2 years later, in 1992, an LTTE publication was released, explaining their position on Muslims, spuriously blaming the actions of the specific government-backed home guards that happened to be run by Muslims on the entire Muslim community. These 2 years have been full of atrocities by Sinhala chauvinism as far as the people of South Tamil Eelam are concerned. The reason for this has been the Muslims who lived as their neighbors thus far. Tamils have been subjected to genocide by Muslims and their home guards who nurture hatred towards the Tamils. The Muslim brethren who have fallen prey to the Sinhala chauvinist conspiracy have murdered Tamils as their enemies, joining hands with the Sinhala forces. This is a sad situation which we did not expect or like. Tamil nationalism hopes for the day when the Muslims would free themselves from the Sinhala conspiracy and would look upon the Tamils as their brothers. A decade later, in 2002, LTTE political strategist and negotiator Anton Balasingham, in a press conference in Kilinochchi with the LTTE leader Prabhakaran, told the press that they had already apologized for the expulsion of the Muslims and that the Tamil homeland also belonged to the Muslims of that region. Balasingham also expressed that the expulsion of the Muslims from Jaffna was a political blunder which could not be justified, and said that the LTTE leadership would be willing to resettle them in the northern district. Despite this apology from Anton Balasingham, many members of the Muslim community remain skeptical of the LTTE's intentions due to the traumatic experiences they felt at the hands of the LTTE. On April 23rd, 1993.
Huge mistake. Instead of trying to seek solidarity, they created even more enemies.
Exactly. This is a hugely emotional. I mean, the LTTE did a lot of horrible shit. Yes, yeah. But they also engaged in a lot of let's just say very emotional reactions. And they another great example of an emotional reaction was they assassinated Neelan Tiruchelvam. Because Neelan Tiruchelvam was basically, he was a politician that basically supported a very watered down devolution plan, even like an extremely watered down devolution plan to the Tamils. And it was a horrific plan that he supported, and he was a very weak politician. Assassinating the guy is a bit much, to say the least.
Yeah.
So it's a bit much, to say the least. But was it a fake apology, or was it too little too late? No, it's a mix of too little too late. Plus, there wasn't any real there. Like, they didn't back up the fact that they tried to apologize with, you know, I mean, they apologized, but there was no substance to the apology. It was just like, oh, we're sorry we kicked you guys out. You know what I mean? But it was just like, it was basically too little too late. Like, you did a lot of fucking damage, and you can't, yeah, it's optics apology, basically. A lot of it was at the time. Here's context to consider. The LTTE are very small in numbers in comparison to the SL Army, with an intelligence network that would bombard them with info on them being attacked on multiple fronts, including betrayals. They were crazy on edge. Exactly. That's the other thing that people have to understand. A lot of the emotional reactions that the LTTE engaged in was as a result of the fact that they were put basically in an impossible position. Like, if you haven't seen what led to the formation of the LTTE in the first place, and what the Sri Lankan government is doing throughout the war, then you probably are going to have this take. But once you put everything in context, then you realize, okay, yes, the LTTE did do horrific fucking mistakes. They did horrific fucking crimes. But again, they were put in basically a very impossible position. The entire world was against them. The entire world literally flooded Sri Lanka with weapons to try and subdue the LTTE, especially in 2003. So that's the other thing you have to consider. Like, it's very easy to be like, yeah, the LTTE did fuck shit, which they did. They absolutely did do fuck shit. They did do horrific things. But at the same time, the LTTE was put into a very impossible fucking position.
And that's usually what you see in a genocide, is when a group has been so isolated from international support, and there's some sort of material advantage to be derived from their destruction, or, you know, that's the conditions where they've basically been denied humanity. They've been denied position equality with all the other nations of the earth. And typically people are genocided who are, you know, large nations that don't have their own state. Therefore, they don't have diplomacy. They don't have a military. They don't have independent relations, but they represent a threat to another state, another nation state, who's trying to subdue them and trying to claim their territory for itself. And we've seen this time and time and time again. This is the model of genocide. You know, whether it's the United States removing, you know, indigenous and First Nations, all of that, you know, and even hell in Europe, the creation of Italy, the creation of France, the creation of Germany required quite harsh, forcible assimilation, suppression of minorities, elimination of dialects, elimination of, you know, it's the Huguenots, for God's sake. There's so many examples throughout history of, even in Europe, you know, you had these nations or these minorities be targeted and destroyed in order to proceed with the national project. And you're seeing that happening here.
Exactly. And the other thing that you'll often see from Sri Lankans especially is that one of the excuses that they give out for saying, no, Elam is, no, fuck Tamils, fuck Elam, whatever, right? One of the reasons that they give out is, well, Palestine existed is a legitimate observer state of the UN. Elam is just a fantasy of a bunch of terrorists. That's the difference.
But
this
all
is a
of
very
stupid
way.
Stupid.
It's a very stupid thing to say, right?
Well, and also, like, nations are invented. So the United Nations is made up. So what nations we decided to grant status and the ones that we didn't is arbitrary. And it's a political decision. It's not based on some sort of like objective metric, right? Like, there's no, like, the Kurds exist, right? There's a nation called the Kurds, but they don't have a state. They don't have a position because they are in a region where there is there are competing nation states that are working overtime to deny them that, because it would reduce their power. So, you know, it's we need to have a better system than nationalism.
1000% agreed. Agreed here. All right, we got a lot more ground to cover, but
we got a lot more ground. Let's keep plowing. we're making good progress. I feel like our cuts are good and are helping understand this for an audience that may not be aware of this situation.
Yeah, it's because that's the thing. Like, this is a country that most people have never heard of before.
Isn't that
most
crazy?
people have never heard of this before. And also, like, I don't know. Okay, I don't know if CNN was covering this at the time. I don't think it was. I think the only major like news outlet that was covering this, and that actually did a decent job of like grilling Sri Lankan politicians, is Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is the only thing. Maybe the BBC, I think they covered it because they're more tangentially related to Sri Lanka. But Al Jazeera, again, Al Jazeera is kind of bipolar on this in the sense of, on the one hand, they absolutely refuse to acknowledge this as anything other than a civil war, right? Even their latest article on the mass graves in Semani, they literally said, no, this is just a civil war, like between, they will actually go and do really good reporting on like the fucked up shit that the Sri Lankan government is doing. But at the same time, they'll say, oh, it's a civil war. It's a civil war, civil war, civil war. And it's like, okay, dude. Like, so Al Jazeera overall is kind of a mixed bag. But if you just look at the stuff that they're actually reporting on with regards to the atrocities of the Sri Lankan government, they're right. But Al Jazeera is probably the best that you're going to get at this point in time. Now, the thing is, people think that like, oh, so the reason this didn't get as much coverage is that, there just isn't as much footage, right, of the Tamils being bombarded or the Tamils being, killed and whatnot. It's actually not true. The Tamils meticulously documented their genocide. The Elam Tamils meticulously documented their genocide since 1948. Actually, to be fair, you are about to see footage. We're approaching 1995. You're about to see footage of war crimes from the 90s. So that's like, it's the reason that there wasn't much reporting on this to begin with is because, again, every major country is invested in Sri Lanka. Just recently, Adani got pulled out because he got grilled by the US. They were building a port in Colombo. China has leased a 99-year port in Hambantota. China has extreme interest in Sri Lanka. India has extreme interest in Sri Lanka. Everyone does.
I mean, it's a strategic location for the entire Indian Ocean, and this
is where Sri Lanka is.
Very important.
For chat. Yeah, this is where Sri Lanka is. You see why it's important now. You get Southeast Asia. You get access to South Asia immediately. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Afghanistan, and then to the west you get MENA. Iran's right there. Iran's right fucking there. And then you also have Somalia. Incredible ports, deep sea chatter. Yeah. For the U.S. chatters, this is where Sri Lanka is, right?
And by the way, just to point out how important this chain is of the Sri Lankan ports, one of the only foreign military bases that China has is in Djibouti, because that gives access to the Gulf of Aden, the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. All of that is very important for international shipping. So having a port in Sri Lanka allows China the ability to, they're currently contained by the island chains and, Taiwan, the Philippines, you have the Malacca Straits. So like, this is a very important, strategic position to prevent China from being blockaded. So they have a huge interest in like trying to maintain positive relations with the Sri Lankan government so that China itself isn't vulnerable. That's the logic of realpolitik.
That's the real politics of it all, and it sucks. There's no other way of saying it. Is garbage.
Yeah. I mean, China's just experienced blockades and colonization themselves. I definitely prefer the Maoist foreign policy to the foreign policy of non-intervention or extremely limited engagement that China pursues. But that's the geopolitical reality that is putting the Tamils in such a difficult spot.
Yeah, it's because everyone wants it's because everyone wants. I think as Taraki Sivaram said something to this effect, Tamils live on a most unfortunate piece of land.
Yeah, I mean, people just want peace in Sri Lanka by any means necessary.
Right, they're willing to get. Yeah, that's the logic, and that means if it means funding a genocide, then that's what that means.
That's right. And the United States is happy to lead the way. So it's also another situation of it's the same thing with Gaza. Like even if we all disagree with it, the United States is backing it. It's the world superpower. How do you fight them?
It sucks because Sri Lanka has such a beautiful history. I don't know if I call.
I mean, it's like any other area like this. It is there's always been ethnic tensions and struggles, but it is also, you know, the legacy of imperialism is exploiting those divisions and exacerbating them for the advantage of the outsider.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Sri Lanka, I mean, the concept of Sri Lanka didn't exist until 1948. That's the thing people aren't realizing. It didn't exist until 1948.
It was part of the Raj, right?
No.
Or what was it? Was it like, so it was Dutch and then the British took it, right? You're going to have to give us basic.
Dutch colonized it. So it was Portuguese, then Dutch.
Portuguese, then Dutch. Okay, yeah.
Portuguese, Dutch, then British. So so that's what I was saying earlier. Sri Lanka was not governed as part of the Raj at all. It was actually used by the British to check the Raj.
Okay, exactly. Yeah.
So it was governed as British Ceylon for a very long time.
Was that directly ruled by the crown, or was that also like...
Yes.
Okay, so that's what separates it from India, is that there's more complexity in the Indian... Okay, yeah.
It was directly governed by the crown at some point, and then basically the only time that Winston Churchill ever had like sweat it, like Winston Churchill basically like admitted this himself. The one time Winston Churchill was scared during World War II was when Japan bombed Trincomalee Harbor. So the reason I mentioned that is that should give an indication as to how vital this island is. That should give you an idea of how strategic this the island of Ceylon is. It's very important. It's in Trincomalee Harbor is one of the world's deepest natural harbors in the world, and not so coincidentally, Trincomalee is in the Tamil side of the island. Yeah. It's in Elam.
Exactly.
It's the capital of Elam. So not so coincidentally.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like when Trump says that Gaza is, you know, great, oceanfront property, and the Israelis will not allow the development of Gaza's like infrastructure. That's a way of, you know, so there is this huge desire to seize this territory and remove the people that live there and have always lived there.
It's the same thing. Like it's the same thing here. They want, I mean, Sri Lanka's entire economy is almost based on tourism. That's how Sri Lanka sustains its economy. It's based on tourism and it's based on trade. There is nothing that Sri Lanka produces that is more important than its location. That's the truth of Sri Lanka. There's nothing that it produces, because they also produce, like, they also engage in some level of farming and manufacturing, but they can't compete with Bangladesh, right? They're not competing with Bangladesh. They're not competing with Pakistan. They're not competing with the rest of the South Asian countries.
Well, they need, you know, in order to build manufacturing, you need investment. You need it requires a large wind up in order to get there.
Exactly. Which Sri Lanka is not that, which people have realized that's not what Sri Lanka's niche is. Sri Lanka is much better.
I have 1 hour left before I unfortunately have to go. So here's what we're gonna do, chat. We're gonna get as far as we can into this, and then I'm gonna be with you. I'm gonna raid into your stream just in 1 hour, and then I'll keep watching with you guys in the chat and stuff. I just have to like leave. Unfortunately, I always load up my Sundays with all these like things I have to do, but we're going to keep watching it together. I'll still be here. I unfortunately just can't stay at the computer, unfortunately. So 1 more hour. Okay. Let's keep blasting.
Former National Security Minister and now Minister of Education Lalit Atulaatmudali was shot by a gunman when he went to address a crowd in Western Province. The people responsible were the LTTE, or so it would seem. A couple of weeks later, on May 1st, President Ranasinghe Premadas's neoliberal United National Party organized an event in commemoration of May Day in an effort to gain favor from labor unions. At around 12:45 in the afternoon, a man named Veerakumar Kulaveerasingham, aka Babu, was led through by security at the behest of President Premadas's valet, EEP Mohideen. As Babu got within 8 to 10 feet of the president, he detonated the suicide vest that he was wearing, killing himself, President Premadasa, Mohideen, and 20 others. An additional 38 to 60 people were injured in the bombing. It was later determined in the aftermath that Babu was contracted by the LTTE to carry out this attack. Although we know what the LTTE's formation was a response to, the motive for the assassination of Premadasa remains unclear. In the aftermath of Premadasa's assassination, Prime Minister Dingiri Banda Wijetunga became acting president until the next presidential election. The prime minister that succeeded Dingiri Banda Wijetunga was another member of the ruling United National Party, Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Ranil Wickremesinghe was the former president, like just the president that just left.
Nephew of former Prime Minister and President J.R. Jayawardena, and distant cousin to the Senanayake family, the family that produced the first and second Prime Ministers of Sri Lanka. The following election year in 1994, there were two elections held, the parliamentary election, followed by the presidential election. The parliamentary election saw the United National Party lose to the Sri Lanka Freedom Party-led coalition called the People's Alliance. At the helm of the People's Alliance was none other than Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, the daughter of former Prime Ministers SWRD and Sirima Bandaranaike. As soon as Chandrika became Prime Minister, she ran for president in the same year. Her presidential opponent was Gamini Disanaike, the Minister of Mahaweli Development under President Jayawardena, who was also ultimately responsible for the burning of the Jaffna Public Library. However, in October 1994, Gamini's campaign was cut short when he was assassinated by a female LTTE suicide bomber. His wife Srima then campaigned in his place for the remaining month. Chandrika ultimately won the presidential election and thus re-established Govigama caste dominance in Sri Lankan politics. The person that would take her place as Prime Minister was none other than her own mother, Sirima.
You are the first woman Prime Minister in the world.
Who had already served her second term as Prime Minister from 1970 to 1977. The following year, President Chandrika Bandaranaike launched an investigation into Education Minister Lalit Attulatmudali's assassination. The investigation yielded results that were drastically different than what the public had been originally led to believe. That it was actually Premadasa and his administration that orchestrated the assassination of the Education Minister, not the LTTE. Lalit Attulatmudali, during his tenure as the Minister of National Security, brought in agents from Israeli intelligence agencies Shin Bet and Mossad to train the aforementioned Sri Lankan Special Task Force alongside the Kini-Mini services against the LTTE. In Lalit's own words, about 10 Israeli agents have trained about 100 Ceylonese in intelligence tactics in the last 2 months. They come in batches and give a course. They do not go outside the classroom. We felt, faced with the situation in Jaffna, we had to get people experienced in this kind of thing. According to our people, they've never had such good training. This position, which was echoed by former President Jayawardena, was in stark opposition to Premadasa's foreign policy, which favored the surrounding MENA countries in the Arab League. In 1991, Premadasa voted against a UN...
So right when you're ready to do a genocide, you cozy up to Israel. So odd!
General Assembly resolution that would remove the classification of Zionism as a form of racism. The following year, in 1992, Premadasa then severed ties with Israel, much to the ire of political rivals Lalit Attulatmudali and Gamini Disanaike, who had strong relations with Mossad and Shin Bet. In 1993, the LTTE gained control of the largest high-security zone in the Jaffna district from the army, Walikamam. During this time, many internally displaced persons attempted to re-establish their lives in the Walikamam area. However, this was not to last, as 2 years later, the Sri Lankan army would again take control, force out the Tamils living there, and gain an additional 217,000 hectares provided to them by the Sri Lankan government. These displaced Tamils would never receive a right to return. On April 19, 1995, the LTTE broke an ongoing ceasefire and blew up 2 Sri Lankan Navy gunboats. This led to the next phase of the armed conflict, where Sri Lanka started an offensive to retake the Jaffna Peninsula from Tiger control, emphasizing the use of artillery and bombing raids.
We are good at peace, but we are good at war also. As much as the government is committed to peace, it is equally committed to the country's unity.
To this extent, the Sri Lankan government started dropping leaflets telling civilians to take shelter at local places of worship. A few hundred Tamil civilians had then taken shelter in a Catholic church in the town of Navali, near Jaffna. A couple of months later in July, the Sri Lankan Air Force bombed a church, originally killing 65 people and injuring 150. The death toll eventually rose to 147 people dead as civilians succumbed to their injuries.
There are portions of this entire video where the entire screen's moving, just for the record. That's how bad it gets. This is nothing, chat. It gets worse. This we're gonna skip. We're gonna skip this portion because this is just like showing the carnage.
Yeah. What are we skipping to?
Yeah, this is just more.
You're just
gore.
documenting what you said. You're just, because it's one thing to do a voiceover chat of the violence, and then because we sanitize this shit. Violence is part of our entertainment. So when someone describes something, it's no different than when we hear a fictional story. You have to see the real shit, and that is what humanizes people. When you see the real sorrow, the real pain, it's what has made Israel's support collapse, is because people could see the genocide every day on their phones. They could see the violence every day on their phones, and you can't help but humanize those people. That's why it's so important that you watch documentaries like this and you help raise awareness of these issues that are happening all over the world. And the other thing that's very important that you understand is that Israel and the United States are at the heart of these atrocities on the African continent, in the Middle East, in South America, in Central America, in Asia, on the Indian subcontinent. You could find Israel's fingerprints and America's fingerprints all over the world. And that's why reining our own imperial program in is the best thing we can do for liberation in the world. That's why you can't be a non-political person, an apolitical person, because your state, your taxes, your government is inflicting this all over the world. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of it.
This is, by the way, the mass graves that I told you that are being uncovered right now. It's from this era. It's from the 90s. So, long story short, Sri Lankan government kidnapped. I mean, they also took a schoolgirl aside, Krishanti Kumaraswamy, took her aside and gang raped her, and then not only killed her, but killed her mom, killed her dad, killed her uncle, killed her family immediately, and then threw them all into the mass grave. And we are now beginning to excavate. Now people are beginning to excavate it, and the bodies of several infants were found in that mass grave, with one infant skull being found, I think 2 days ago on June 26th. This is nothing, chat. You're going to see worse. I promise you.
October 21st, new emergency regulations had been imposed, granting widespread censorship powers on all war-related reporting. All reports had to be run past a government-appointed competent authority for censorship before publication. The very next day, a Sri Lankan Air Force aircraft bombed Nagarkoil Mahavidyalaya, a primary school in the city of Jaffna. The school was crammed with about 750 children on their lunch break. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, more than 30 died, of whom 12 were 6 or 7-year-olds. 156 were injured, 40 were seriously injured. The death toll eventually increased to 71, with 41 succumbing to their wounds. The scene of the attack was visited by the Red Cross. Pieces of human flesh were strewn around the area, including the tree branches, making identification of bodies impossible. This attack, and many attacks around this time, were carried out by Pukara bombers that Argentina had sold to Sri Lanka. 2 surgeons from Doctors Without Borders at a hospital in Point Pedro worked around the clock carrying out 22 amputations, in 4 cases removing both legs. 10 of the amputees were under 12 years old.
Can I just pause and talk about the Argentinian aircraft? Like these aircraft that you're seeing, oh fuck, I lost. These aircraft that you're seeing here, they can only really be used against a non-militarized population. You know, like this, it cannot be used against a pure military. It can't be used against a military that has air defenses. It can only be used against the defenseless. It is because it is much slower than jet aircraft. It's less capable. So when these weapons are being sold, when they're being used, they're designed to be used to suppress civilian populations. And so, like, we should not be confused about the nature of this Air Force. The Air Force is designed to be used against the civilian population, not to deter other nations or to prevent other states from interfering with Sri Lankan sovereignty. It's intentionally designed military to do genocide.
Yes.
And that's crazy.
Of these jets were sold. 4 of these jets were sold to Sri Lanka, by the way, by Argentina. And they were used primarily in the 90s.
Are you going to deter? Are you going to deter India with these? No. This is basically a escalation of the capability that, again, would not exist without outside interference.
100%.
Removing both legs. 10 of the amputees were under 12 years old. The airstrike on the primary school was part of a 2-day bombing campaign of the Jaffna Peninsula. On the same day, Pukara bombers that Argentina had sold to Sri Lanka targeted 2 villages, Manalkada and Kutkovalam, and killed 6 people. In another incident in the early morning, intense shelling from the Palali army camp killed 7 members of the same family, including 4 children of varying ages. The British Refugee Council said press reports were heavily censored. Military sources first denied the attack, then claimed Nagarkoil was a Sea Tiger base where LTTE cadres had gathered to honor Tiger martyr Dilipan. 6 weeks earlier, Sri Lanka aircraft bombed civilians seeking refuge around Navali Catholic Church, 4 miles west of Jaffna, killing 130 people and injuring 120. Reports of the Nagarkoil bombing were heavily censored under the new restrictions. Like Navali, whether Nagarkoil was an accident or deliberate, air and artillery attacks on all northern civilians will continue. Civilians are unidentifiable from the air, unless perhaps there are 750 of them all.
The other thing you'll notice is that, especially in Sri Lankan political discourse and Sri Lankan political circles, there's also a subtle erasure of the Tamil identity, in the sense of oftentimes Tamils, especially in Jaffna and in the Jaffna, Badikalason, etc., they're not referred to as Tamils in a lot of political discourse. The northern province and eastern province Elams are not, like, the Elam is not referred to as, obviously not Elam, but they're not referred to like the Tamil dominated portion. The word Tamil is often erased from discourse. They're referred to as northerners, easterners. Why? It's because again, it's part of reinforcing this concept of unitary Sri Lankan state, 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 unitary Sri Lankan state. We're all one Sri Lanka. We're all one Sri Lanka. Now, the truth of the matter is there is no Sri Lankan state without Sinhala Buddhist nationalism. There is no modern form of Sri Lankan state without. This is why we need a strong left. Brother, you're about to figure out, you're about to learn about what Sri Lanka's left looks like. And it's not pretty.
Oh, no.
You're about to learn what Sri Lanka's left looks like, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, it's nationalists. That's
They're
why
Nazis,
you need pluralism. Yeah. They basically are, it is, we're going to do leftism for our people and not those subhumans.
Yes. And they do way more than that, by the way. You'll see.
Them all dressed in spotless white school uniforms. On October 30th, 1995, around 400,000 to 600,000 Tamils fled their homes in Jaffna as the Sri Lankan army launched a military offensive to recapture the Jaffna Peninsula Under the leadership of Chandrika Bandaranaike, the entire town of Jaffna was forced into a mass exodus towards the forested Vanni region of the mainland, which was controlled by the LTTE. They walked for miles carrying whatever they could, crossing the Navatkuli Bridge, managing to enter the neck of the Jaffna Peninsula before making the dangerous boat to Kilinochchi. Despite the censorship measures enacted last month by the Sri Lankan government, UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali.
By the way, 500,000 people were turned into refugees during this point. 500,000, 500,000 people. They were forced to leave their homes. 500,000 people. 500,000 people were turned into internally displaced persons, internal refugees, because of the Sri Lankan government's actions. Just keep that in mind.
Appealed for assistance for the refugees. Here are some reports from the time. About half of the 400,000 Tamil refugees are living and sleeping outdoors in heavy monsoon rains, said Gerard Patronyet, who heads the International Committee of the Red Cross here. The rest are holed up in churches, schools, and relatives' homes. The refugees have very little food or proper sanitation, he added. Doctors are already seeing cases of dysentery and eye infections, and while cholera hasn't struck yet, the conditions are perfect for a deadly epidemic, relief workers warned. Sri Lanka's military won't let journalists cross into areas controlled by the rebel liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. Relief workers are so afraid of making the government angry, they refuse to photograph or shoot video of the refugees suffering and smuggle the pictures out to reporters. The war zone's few hospitals are dangerously low on anesthetics for surgery and several drugs essential to stopping the spread of diseases and treating war casualties, the relief workers said. Few were willing to criticize the government publicly because they are afraid that it will shut down the relief operation in retaliation. I don't think they want an international presence there to witness what's happening, a senior Western relief official said. Sri Lanka has banned international agencies from aiding Tamil refugees over fears that some are not impartial. We do not intend to permit any outside agencies, including the UN, to carry out independent operations, said Foreign Minister Lakshman Kadirgamar. He also expressed displeasure at the appeal made by UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali, whom he accused of exaggerating the situation. Lakshman Kadirgamar, the Minister of Foreign Affairs under President Chandrika Bandaranaike, was a Tamil originally from the northernmost district of Jaffna. He was hailed worldwide for being a brilliant statesman. However, on the island, he was fully supportive of the actions of the Sri Lankan military, including the bombing of Navali Church and the primary school in his own home district, and actively made it near impossible for the UN and the Red Cross to report information out of the north. In fact, it was his request that the United States prescribe the LTTE as a terrorist organization, which the US did on October 8, 1997. One of the $500,000 people that were forcibly displaced by the Sri Lankan army in this operation was none other than our window into the conflict, Isse Priya, who eventually managed to make the arduous journey to the Vanni region. The time frame between 1997 and 2001 was one of the most pivotal from the side of the LTTE. The government of Sri Lanka, having successfully captured the Jaffna Peninsula along with strategic areas such as Elephant's Pass, which connects Jaffna with the mainland, and the southern areas of Vavuniya district, which bordered Sri Lanka proper, wanted to fortify their victory. The Sri Lankan government had hoped to split the tiger-controlled areas of Eelam in half by connecting Kilinochchi and Vavuniya by capturing a 76-kilometer stretch of the A9 road. This operation, launched in May 1997, would, in theory, have severely weakened the LTTE's capabilities. The LTTE, however, held out for at least 16 months, long enough for them to capture the well-fortified Kilinochchi military garrison in September 1998. The conventional military prowess of the LTTE was enough to force the Sri Lankan government to call off its longest-lasting military operation in December 1998, lasting a total of 19 months, with the Sri Lankan army taking heavy casualties. Almost an entire year later, in November 1999, the LTTE launched an offensive codenamed Unceasing Waves 3, in which they managed to retake all of the area that the Sri Lanka armed forces took within their 19-month operation. Despite having a clear military advantage, the LTTE refreshed their call for negotiations that same month. By December 1999, the LTTE successfully overran the Parandan area in the north of Kilinochchi, which stood as the southern defense line of the Elephant Pass base complex, raising serious worries among defense circles regarding the safety of the Elephant Pass garrison, which was the most important strategic.
Okay, The one thing I want to highlight here is defense circles, counterinsurgency community. Those are real terms. People need to understand. The way that these guys collaborate is that they literally hold conferences, they hold meetings, they communicate like it's almost like a fucking Reddit community, like a fucking Discord server or whatever. Obviously not like that, but that's what it is. That's what, imagine a fucking Discord server for people whose job it is to literally, figure out how to stop militant groups.
Well, I mean, it's even more than that. Like, that's actually the primary preoccupation of Mark Miley, who is the general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Excuse me. I read his dissertation on. It was on basically guerrilla groups and guerrilla movements. He specialized in studying the IRA in Ireland, but he also studied like Mao, the Russian Revolution. He studied all sorts of counterinsurgency shit. And they've, it's so funny because so many leftists will be like, read theory about revolution. And it's like, if you were in America and you wanted to know the people with the largest % chance of actually reading guerrilla warfare tactics and theory,
join the military.
It's the fucking it's the counterinsurgency guys. So you're telling me to follow a playbook that was written in the 70s. These people have been refining their responses or earlier to these tactics for decades and decades, and they share it. And as you say, they collaborate.
It's funny that you mentioned that. At the conference, you'll see at the end of the documentary, one of the speakers, Ahmed Hashim, literally goes on a rant. Not a rant, but he literally goes on a lecture about Mao and People's War. This is absolutely correct.
Oh, they know.
The people that are most likely to learn this stuff, the people that are most likely to read this kind of theory are, ironically enough, the very people that are trying to fight everyone else.
Well, they're
the people that are trying to put down this sort of thing.
They counter our tactics in really devious ways. You don't even consider it. You think these people are going to fight you honorably? They're going to like send spies in to poison the food rations that you try to give to people. They're gonna start killing the families of anybody who helps out one of your people. Like these guys do. They try to make it so any resistance to what they're doing is a persona non grata. They will take over villages and exile people's families and kill them all. If you are suspected of being a resistance fighter, they'll go in and exterminate your entire family. So this is the type of shit that is practiced and explained and actually advocated by the United States in, places like the School of the Americas and other counterinsurgency warfare, what's the best way to say it? Institutes, studies, think tanks. Like they are pushing out these genocidal tactics in order to counter any kind of resistance, and it all flows from the U.S. and Israel.
Strategic asset of the Sri Lankan army in order to secure the grip over the Jaffna Peninsula, despite being described as impregnable by a U.S. Army officer who visited the area. In April 2000, the Elephant Pass military garrison collapsed as the LTTE forces marched towards Jaffna, gaining control over the entire Vanni mainland. The serious military setback forced the Sri Lankan government to seek Indian military assistance while re-establishing diplomatic ties with Israel with immediate effect. Despite all such efforts to bolster the Sri Lankan government's military capabilities, in the middle of May 2000, the second largest town Chavakacheri in the Jaffna Peninsula fell into the hands of the LTTE, who marched further northwards, posing a clear threat to the government troops trapped in Jaffna. In November 2000, the LTTE renewed their peace offer and declared a month-long unilateral ceasefire on December 24, 2000. The LTTE statement, issued 3 days prior, said, "We make this declaration of cessation in armed hostilities unilaterally, hoping that the Sri Lanka government will reciprocate positively and instruct its armed forces to observe peace during the festive season of Christmas, New Year, and Pongal. Our decision to cease armed hostilities should be viewed with a genuine expression of goodwill, indicating our sincere desire for peace and negotiated political settlement. We offer this space of peace to facilitate and promote initiatives to create congenial conditions of normalcy, de-escalating the armed confrontation. However, The Sri Lankan government, led by Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga, issued a statement rejecting the ceasefire. The government believes that further gestures of goodwill are unnecessary when it has clearly indicated its wish to engage in talks with the LTTE forthwith on the substantial issues involved, with a view to resolving the ethnic question, ending the war, and paving the way for a durable peace. The government considers a ceasefire as a consequent step that would arise when negotiations proceed to the mutual satisfaction of both sides. The government of Sri Lanka repeats its call to the LTTE to engage honestly in this opportunity for peace. Until then, military operations will continue. Despite this rejection from the Sri Lankan government, the LTTE would extend their unilateral ceasefire until April 2001. On September 11, 2001, a far-right Muslim fundamentalist militant organization by the name of Al-Qaeda attacked the famous Twin Towers in New York, as well as the Pentagon in Arlington, near Washington, D.C., killing roughly 3,000 civilians. In the aftermath of this attack, the United States and its allies started to adopt a more counterterrorism and counterinsurgency-focused foreign policy. The U.S. had already designated the Tamil Tigers as a terrorist organization at the behest of the Sri Lankan government under President Chandrika Bandaranaike and Foreign Minister Lakshman Kadurgamar in 1997. But in the wake of 9/11, the United States designated the LTTE as specially designated global terrorists.
The United States has stressed that the LTTE is responsible for the suffering undergone by the Tamil civilians in Sri Lanka.
The post-9/11 counterterrorism foreign and domestic policies that the Western powers had adopted were directed at the LTTE's largest financiers, the Elam Tamil diaspora that had managed to escape the island and settle in Europe, the UK, Canada, Australia, and the US. This new
that's why you declare them terrorists, so they can't raise money. Like, that's the whole point. Like, that's why they declared, like, you know, all the Palestinian groups as terrorists, so they can't raise money. That's why the Holy Land Five, which is actually becoming relevant right now, because Zoran made a rap where he said like the Holy Land Five were his brothers or something like that. They were basically just Palestinian diaspora raising money to help Gazans, and then some of that money went to the Hamas government because Hamas rules over Gaza, and the United States said, you're supporting Hamas, a terrorist group, you can't do that, and then they arrested them. Meanwhile, American allies are literally giving money to Hamas, but it's not a problem because they're politically connected to the US. They didn't want to have any independent diaspora money flowing toward Gaza to help build up their strength. So the US uses these terrorist designations in order to target populations for elimination.
The funny thing is, so actually the Elam Tamil population in America is actually quite tiny. So most of the Tamils you'll come across,
we control finance. We control international finance. So anytime we declare a group terrorist, we can like block it through, you know, the SWIFT system, etc. So you can't even raise money from Europe or Canada or anything like that.
Yes. So, well, it's not just the U.S. that does this. You'll see in a second, but
yeah,
the largest Tamil diaspora.
Sorry about that.
Hold on. The largest Tamil diaspora community is not in the or Elam Tamil diaspora community is not in the U.S. It's in Canada. So you'll see why that's important.
Well, Canada just declared the PFLP in Palestine a terrorist group, like I want to say a year ago or so, or maybe it was shortly after October 7th for exactly this same reason, which is then the PFLP is the left-wing Palestinian political party. So like everybody's like, I want to see secular Palestinian, groups, and it's like, oh wait, no, they're terrorists too.
No, Canada's barely better than the U.S. for this shit. Yeah, you'll see. Give it a second to play.
To more directly crack down on diaspora-run organizations in the U.S. that were funding the LTTE. In addition to this, what was arguably even more decisive with regards to the war was Canada following suit in 2005 and banning the LTTE's funding networks in their own borders. Canada has the largest diaspora Elam Tamil population, numbering at roughly 300,000. And many of them were illicitly funding the LTTE through underground networks and front organizations. This was one of many devastating blows dealt to the LTTE by Western powers as part of developing goodwill towards the Sri Lankan government. In August 2000, Prime Minister Sirima Bandaranaike stepped down due to health reasons and was replaced by Ratnasiri Vikramanayake, a hardline opponent of the Tamil national movement. He refused to consider talks with the LTTE, disposing of the idea of a non-military solution. At a Buddhist ceremony, he also said that the Sinhalese people should concentrate on having more children so that they can join the Sri Lanka armed forces in the fight against the LTTE. An official...
Oh, one other thing. So unlike the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces, there is absolutely no conscription, mandatory conscription in the Sri Lankan army. Completely voluntary. Just wanted to throw that out. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Pretty crazy.
It's completely fucking voluntary. The Sri Lankan army is completely voluntary. There is no mandatory conscription whatsoever. Just wanted to throw that out there.
An official newspaper at the time stated that the government was also providing bonuses for families with more than 2 children. The parliamentary election was held that year. On October 10th, former Prime Minister Sirima Bandaranaike cast her ballot.
Also, yes, PFLP trained the Tamil militants. That's another point that that PPYT wants to throw in there. Yes, the Plot in particular received training from PFLP in Lebanon and Syria.
Presumably for her daughter's coalition.
Same fight.
She later died that day from a heart attack. Chandrika's People's Alliance ended up winning the election without forming a majority, with massive allegations of election fraud and intimidation. 70 people were killed during the campaign, and 6 died on election day alone. Because the People's Alliance was unable to form a majority, there was much internal political tension in Chandrika's administration, which would be brought to a head when she sacked Sri Lanka Muslim Congress leader Rauf Hakim from her cabinet. In response to this, members of the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress and its front organization, the National Unity Alliance, resigned from their posts. The tensions heightened further after a government minister was accused of instigating a racist attack on Muslims in the town Mawanela in April 2001. Since then, Hakim had been talking with the United National Party-run opposition coalition, led by former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. Under the threat of a no-confidence vote, Chandrika reconvened the parliamentary elections in 2001, this time with the United National Party winning the elections with a majority, and Ranil Wickremesinghe becoming Prime Minister for the second time. Ranil, along with the United National Party as a whole, looked more towards the West for assistance than the Chandrika Bandaranaike government. While Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe and the UNP expressed enthusiasm for a political solution to the conflict, President Chandrika Bandaranaike and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party were more openly opposed to a political solution. On December 19th, in the wake of elections, the LTTE declared a 30-day unilateral ceasefire and pledged to halt all attacks on the Sri Lankan government forces. The Bandaranaike-led government welcomed the move and reciprocated the ceasefire and agreed to lift an embargo on LTTE-controlled territory. On February 22, 2002, the LTTE and the Sri Lankan government entered a memorandum of understanding and signed a permanent ceasefire agreement, with Norway being the mediator. As part of the Memorandum of Understanding, Norway, along with the other Nordic countries, would monitor the ceasefire through a committee of experts named the Sri Lanka Monitoring Mission, SLMM. All while these ceasefire negotiations were occurring, Western powers such as the US, Israel, UK, Czech Republic, Spain, as well as non-Western powers such as Iran, China, and North Korea continued to arm Sri Lanka and give military counsel to its leadership, ultimately allowing the tide of the war to slowly turn in favor of the Sri Lankan government, and would eventually embolden the military to launch an all-out kinetic final assault on the LTTE, as well as the Tamil population as a whole in 2006. On October 31, 2003, the LTTE issued its own peace proposal, calling for an interim self-governing authority in the northeastern parts of the island. This proposal is notable because this is the first time where the LTTE has openly dropped the demand for a separate Tamil Eelam state, and where the LTTE is showing willingness to work within the framework of the Sri Lankan state. While the international reception to this was generally outwardly positive, the reception to this proposal inside Sri Lanka was far more acidic. The JVP, which was part of
these are the Nazi communists, Chad. The JVP are these guys. And the current leader of Sri Lanka, the current president of Sri Lanka, you'll see him in this video.
Chandrika Bandaranaike's alliance considered this to be an equivalent to a de facto Tamil Eelam, despite the fact that the LTTE's proposal outright conceded to a one-state solution under the Sri Lankan framework. On November 3rd, while Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was out of the country, President Chandrika Bandaranaike suspended parliament, took control of the Ministries of Defense, Interior, and Information, and ordered troops to key installations on the island. On February 7, 2004, President Bandaranaike suspended parliament and called for parliamentary elections in April of that month. In 2004, Colonel Vinayagamurthy Muralidharan, aka Colonel Karuna, broke away from the LTTE alongside the forces directly under his supervision due to allegations of financial mismanagement and embezzling from inside the LTTE closing in on him. Unable to handle disciplinary action for embezzlement and public embarrassment from Prabhakaran, the leader of the LTTE, Colonel Karuna would see an exit ramp into mainstream Sri Lankan politics through his recent connections with a member of Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's United National Party. This was one of the turning points of the war, as this was one of the main signals that would spell doom for the LTTE. Colonel Karuna was a top commander of the LTTE in charge of the Eastern Province, comprising the Trincomalee and Batticaloa districts. The capital of Tamil Elam was Trincomalee. It was Colonel Karuna's entry into the Sri Lankan government and the subsequent hemorrhaging of the LTTE's active military force that would embolden the Sri Lanka Armed Forces to initiate a final assault starting in the Eastern Province in 2006. In Sri Lanka's 2004 parliamentary elections, the Bandaranaike family-led Sri Lanka Freedom Party again contested against the incumbent United National Party headed by two-time Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party gained a majority and would select a Prime Minister whose name would later enter the Hall of Infamy, Mahinda Rajapaksa.
This is the Benjamin Netanyahu of Sri Lanka. Remember this dude. Mahinda Rajapaksa is the Benjamin Netanyahu of this country. This guy, Mahinda Rajapaksa. Keep that name in mind.
An open Sinhala Buddhist nationalist and the second oldest son of one of the founders of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, Don Alwyn Rajapaksa. For the 2005 presidential election, the party had selected Mahinda to run against the opposing candidate from the United National Party, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who had just been thrown out of the Prime Minister's office for the second time the previous year. Mahinda Rajapaksa led a campaign on the promise of wiping out the LTTE in its entirety at all costs. One of the parties that happily joined in on this promise of a scorched earth campaign against the LTTE was none other than the aforementioned Marxist-Leninist JVP, who tried to lead an uprising against the J.R. Jayawardena government in the 1980s. Yes, you heard that correctly. The largest communist party, along with many other communist parties in Sri Lanka,
oh look, there's the current president
coalition
right now.
with
Anura Kumar Dissanayake. Yep, there's the current president.
Open fascists, led by the Sri Lankan equivalent of Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, the JVP were some of the largest proponents of the policy of never compromising with the LTTE or the Tamils.
Before we go ahead, right? I think my mod said something which is a very good comparison. These guys, JVP, are the labor Zionists of Sri Lanka.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
They are that. So think of the JVP, and not just the JVP, all the communists of Sri Lanka, all the communist parties of Sri Lanka, almost all of them. Even the CPSL is like currently in an alliance with. I don't even like calling these kind of irrelevant.
I don't even like calling these type of groups communist or socialist or anything. Even if they self-describe that way, it's better. They're Nazbols. You know,
they're Nazbols. They're labor Zionists. That's the best way of describing them.
Nazbols. I mean, they're not part of. They're not really advocating for international liberation, which is the whole point of socialism. That's why we call it the Internationale. That's why we condemn the vanity of nations, because nations are not the way in which people are divided. Nations are not the way in which people are oppressed. It is through the division between workers and capitalists, bourgeoisie. And so these elements, this is false consciousness that is used in order to advance the interests of the bourgeoisie. And you can see it here, like they're working with fascists, and it's nationalism that has led them there.
Yeah, these guys degenerated a long time ago. They degenerated even when they rose up against the government in the late 80s. They were still extremely hostile to Tamils. Now, the reasoning behind it, this goes all the way back to the founder of the JVP, Rohana Vijayawada. The reason, and you'll hear this a lot from communists in this region, they'll often deny self-determination of an ethnic group that is currently facing state atrocities, based on this idea that the movement is bourgeois and reactionary. So they basically said the Tamil nationalist movement is an inherently bourgeois and reactionary movement. Now, that's bullshit. This is just frankly bullshit. Like, it's bullshit, right? It's bullshit. Like, everyone in Elam, every Tamil person has had someone that has fought in the LTTE. Everyone knows. Everyone has a family member that fought in the LTTE. There's no denying. So to say that it's some bourgeois nationalist reactionary movement is ridiculous. The Tamil nationalist movement is a reaction to Sinhalese Buddhist nationalism. It's a reaction to a settler colonial form of genocide that is being engaged upon the Tamils even today. So, but this is the sort of justification you see a lot from communists in Sri Lanka as to why Tamil self-determination, why Elam is bullshit. It's just saying, oh, it's bourgeoisie reactionary. This is a common calling call of these guys. So keep that in mind going forward. They'll say that.
Proponents of the policy of never compromising with the LTTE or the Tamils. For example, when the Boxing Day tsunami on December 26, 2004 hit Sri Lanka, killing 30,000 and leaving 500,000 people homeless, the JVP used this as an opportunity to stir up even more tensions between the Tamils and the Sinhalese. They, instead of helping the victims of the tsunami who were from all different ethnic backgrounds, launched a campaign to sabotage a deal between the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE to form a joint administrative mechanism to distribute aid to tsunami victims in the Northeast. The JVP reckoned that this joint resolution to help the victims of the tsunami in the Northeast was a, quote, massive betrayal to the fatherland. The JVP, which was in an alliance with the SLFP, threatened to quit the government in order to try and get the government to stop working with the LTTE to distribute aid.
They sabotaged aid going to the Tamils. They sabotaged aid going to the Tamils because, no, JVP is not, it's not Jewish Voice for Peace. JVP is Janata Vimukti Peramuna. That's the name of the party, right? Janata Vimukti Peramuna. They denied aid going to the Tamils. They sabotaged aid going to the Tamils because in their heads, their entire modus operandi is we need the Sri Lankan government to go all out against the Tigers. We need to mow down the Tigers and all the Tamils completely so that once this war is done, then we can build a support base and then take over the state. Yeah. Insane bullshit. Insane shit.
Yeah. I mean, a real communist party would work with the Tamils to overturn the Sri Lankan government. So this is just nationalism being filtered through bullshit.
Framing Sinhalese army enlistment as purely genocidal ignores context, and Sri Lanka Military Service Office offers rare economic stability, healthcare, pensions, and future opportunities amid war and a weak economy. It wasn't just voluntary. It was often a necessary path to a better life, not solely driven by ethnic hatred. Okay, but you can say the same thing about like the American military. Actually, I would even say that the Sri Lankan, it's not even Sinhalese army, it's the Sri Lankan army. The thing is,
I think the point, can I jump in here real quick? This is the same point, like what he's demonstrating by the fact that the army is completely voluntary is that there is a national consensus to do this violence. Like, this isn't something that is going against Sri Lankan public opinion. Just like in Israel, there's vast support for ethnic cleansing and genocide, showing that you have a state and the people and the population supporting it is fully bought into the idea of genocidal policy. This is not being imposed by a small subset of the elite. This is a policy that has widespread support among the dominant nationality. Just like in Israel, there is widespread support for genocide of Arabs. And just like in Germany, there was widespread support for the extermination of undesirables and Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and communists. Like, they were able to, like, the idea that this is just like some small demented fraction of the society is not true. And it blinds us to what is necessary to really do anti-genocide action. We have to also arrest the entire state and nation supporting it from falling down this path. We can't just point our fingers at a few bad apples.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great way of putting it. This entire genocidal war was it's important to realize that all of the war crimes that the Sri Lankan government are committing against the Tamils, or they were committing against the Tamils at this point in time, there was complete consent for it. It's like Mike said, the entire thing is it's national consent to say, hey, listen, let's go kill these people, right? The biggest motivating factor, if you ask Sri Lankans in general for joining the army, is to stop the terrorists. That's the main reason.
I mean, that's why people joined the military in 2001, you know, like in 2002, like people were joining the military to fight these wars, you know?
The way I heard it a long time ago is that it was a symmetrical conflict between Sinhalese and Tamils propagandized. Yeah, that's Sri Lankan government propaganda. That's a lie. Not even one. It was not. It looked symmetrical. If it looked symmetrical at all, it's because the LTTE was extremely competent and the Sri Lankan army was extremely incompetent, that they needed the entire world to help them on this. That's why it maybe looked symmetrical, right? That's why it looked like a symmetric conflict, but it wasn't. It was a complete genocidal campaign that started in 1948.
Probably would have went another way if the Soviet Union were still around. Honestly, if there had been any counter force that was helping the Tamils.
Got bad news on that front.
Yeah, I'm sure the Soviets were pro Sri Lankan in the 80s, right?
Soviet Union didn't back Sri Lanka in the 80s because, so it's a bit complicated in that the Soviet Union wouldn't have backed Sri Lanka in the 80s because Sri Lanka was run by a neoliberal government, J.R. Jayawardena. The UNP is a neoliberal party, so the Soviet Union wouldn't have backed them. They would have probably been more allied with the person you're seeing here, which is Chandrika Bandaranaike, which is the SLFP, right? They would have been more allied with the Bandaranaike family because they would have been like the sort of Nehruvian national, you know, like anti-colonial nationalists plus like nominally socialist sort of, you know, group of people. Plus,
it's like how the Soviet Union initially supported Israel because of the labor Zionists and the, you know, socialists. So like, they bought into the bullshit. Yeah.
Speaking of which, when the JVP they supported the JVP when the JVP was rising up against the Sri Lankan government. That's the one party they supported.
Yeah, which makes sense because they were Marxist-Leninists, right? So they were
exactly, or at least they were nominally Marxist-Leninists.
They said they were. They put, you know,
they said they were, but even in the 80s, they were like, no, the Tamils don't deserve any self-determination. When they were rising up against the government of Sri Lanka. So unfortunately, had the JVP even won, there's the truth of the matter is the same atrocities or similar atrocities that you're seeing happen to the Tamils under other governments, there's a good chance they would have done the same thing, unfortunately. Because again, that party had eroded, that party degraded into being a chauvinist nationalist party by that point already. So there was nothing other than like, oh, we want to create a worker state or whatever, that rhetoric that really differentiated the JVP from the other parties. And even now, especially now, there's very little that really differentiates the JVP in a party like SJB or I mean, SJB is probably the only other maybe relevant party. JVP is just, it's still the same underlying Sinhalese Buddhist nationalist rhetoric. It's still the same thing.
All right. Well, I got my 10-minute warning before I have to bounce. So let's chat. If you want to keep watching, and I tell you should, I'm going to be raiding over to Arun's channel. And you have another great leftist that you can hang out with and learn more about some of the like unspoken conflicts that exist. You know, one of the things that could be overwhelming when you become a leftist and you start really educating yourself beyond what you see in the headlines is just how harmful the United States is as a force around the world. It can be overwhelming. So it's important to have other leftists who can help you remain sane, keep yourself pointed in an optimistic direction, while also, you know, not making yourself seem like a crazy person when you talk to regular people. Like that's my biggest problem is like I want to rush and do an info dump, but you have to have these conversations slowly, and you need to learn how to like make this palatable for other people so that you can change their positions, change their minds, so we can hopefully change some of this shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to plow.
All right, let's run through this. Let's run this.
And JVP also entered since 2001. First they became part of a provisional government, which was formed with Chandrika Bandaranaike's government. And then in 2004, they became a coalition member of the group that was led by Chandrika Bandaranaike, which is called as People's United Freedom Alliance. And then they became kind of most important kind of cheerleader during the campaign of Mahinda Rajapaksa for presidency. And they signed a kind of agreement with Mahinda Rajapaksa's election campaign to make sure that they support Mahinda Rajapaksa's candidacy. And then throughout the war, they mobilized the ordinary masses, the workers, the peasants, you know, And they formed mass organizations basically to promote the kind of, war effort, to make kind of public, basically to influence the public to support the war effort, and also to increase the morale of the military. There was a kind of organization called Patriotic National Movement, which was basically formed by the JVP and led by the JVP. And the objective of that organization was to boost the morale of the military. And the JVP leaders went into military camps to make speeches to the soldiers, to make them, prepare for the vote and go, to do their job properly. So in that sense, JVP cannot claim any kind of left-wing credentials for championing the issues of the Tamils or the Muslims or any other oppressed people, because they were the kinds of most enthusiastic cheerleader of the final war, whatever that they say now,
Eventually, the JVP's aim of denying as much aid to the Tamil-dominated Northeast would be fulfilled, as much of the tsunami aid was denied by the government as a war of attrition tactic against the LTTE. This denial of aid would compound and would add to the multi-dimensional poverty of the Tamil population in the Northeast. Mahinda Rajapaksa won the election and immediately reshuffled the cabinet. He extended the term of the commander of the Sri Lankan army, Sarath Fonseca, while appointing many new people to his cabinet. The person that Mahinda appointed as the Secretary of Defense would also enter the Hall of Infamy. His own younger brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Gotabaya, also known as Gota, would go on to hold unprecedented power within the administration. Some other names that you should keep in mind for the coming sections are Shavendra Silva, Sarath Weerasekara, Jagat Diaz, Jagat Jayasuriya, and Kamal Gunaratna. The Sri Lankan military would begin the final phase of the war in 2006 in the eastern province while still conducting bombing raids in the northern province. On August 14th, the Sri Lankan Air Force bombed what it said was an LTTE training camp using an Israel Aircraft Industries Kafir jet, killing 61 girls aged 16 to 18. What UNICEF and the University Teachers for Human Rights Jaffna found was that 1. The compound the Sri Lankan Air Force bombed was not a training camp for the LTTE, it was an orphanage. And 2, the girls that were bombed by the Sri Lankan Air Force were studying for their A-levels, their final exams in high school. The Sri Lankan government went on to publicly deny that the compound that they bombed was only an orphanage and insisted that it was a training camp. The military spokespeople went on to say that even if the children they killed were underaged, they were very likely LTTE soldiers undergoing training. On September 17, 2006, in the southern part of Ampara district in the town of Potuvil, 11 Muslim laborers who had gone to fix Rattle tank went missing. The following morning, 10 of their bodies had been discovered. They had been hacked to death. One person, Mira Mohideen, was the sole survivor. The Sri Lankan government immediately placed the blame for the murder on the LTTE, although members of the Muslim community living in Potuvil had other suspicions that seemed to line up better with what was happening on the ground. They had blamed the murder on the Sri Lankan Special Task Force. One of them stated while protesting this massacre, "Special Task Force troops killed these people. We don't blame anyone else. The LTTE can't come into this area. It is completely controlled by the Special Task Force. Without the Special Task Force's knowledge, no one can come into this area." Another resident of the area said the following, "The victims were tortured and cut to death. This was a well-planned attack. It is highly unlikely that the LTTE could infiltrate into an area carrying swords and then leave without the Special Task Force spotting them. What were the Special Task Force doing?" As the residents had stated, Potuvil is in southern Ampara district, which was in firm control of the Sri Lankan government in 2006. It didn't make any sense for the LTTE to somehow suddenly sneak in, massacre 10 laborers and gravely injure one, and leave without any detection from the Sri Lankan Special Task Force, let alone a fight. Just for context, about 50 Muslims had been killed in Trincomalee district by government shelling in early August 2006, and 80 had limbs amputated in Trincomalee and Kandalai hospitals. Amid these accusations, the Sri Lankan government acted suspiciously. The ambulance transporting Mira, the sole survivor of these attacks, was prevented by police from entering the city of Kalmune, a Muslim-majority city and the largest city in Ampara district. The ambulance was then redirected to the town of Ampara, which is 99% Sinhalese. Mira was held incommunicado by armed guards at Ampara.
By the way, the reason that the town is 99% Sinhalese is that this town was literally built to house the Galoya dam workers. So this is literally a colony, by the way. So
was that
part of
done by the government, or was that a British settlement? Like, do you know who found it?
No, it wasn't British. The Sri Lankan government did this.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because
So
I think in
after-
the last part 1 we talked about the foundation of some of these colony towns. Is this one of those from part 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Beautiful. I remember
This is
that.
one of those. Yes, this is one of the colonies that was set up during part 1.
Okay, that makes sense. Make sure you guys check out part 1 as well.
A hospital, and the Sri Lanka monitoring mission was denied from seeing him. Eyewitness reports on the ground said that the Sinhala majority police destroyed any evidence of the crime scene. A Muslim rights group contacted Mira's family, who said that he was in an awful mental state. He could only grunt incoherently. This was also the police's rationale for turning away the Sri Lanka monitoring mission and members of his family. Mira then, in a videotaped testimony given from the hospital to Minister ALM Attawullah, proceeded to blame the LTTE for the massacre. However, Attawullah himself came under suspicion from the Muslim community, with the Muslim community suspecting him to be behind the fabricated statements made by Mira, placing blame on the LTTE for the massacre. What makes Mira's situation all the more heart-wrenching is that he and his family are survivors of the Boxing Day tsunami in 2005, and were living in a hut using clothes as walls for their hut. The Muslim residents of Pottuvel and Kalmune also placed the blame for the massacre on the Marxist-Leninist JVP as well as the JHU, a far-right Sinhala Buddhist nationalist party founded and led by Sinhala Buddhist monks, as they were the ones who had benefited the most apart from the Sri Lankan government themselves from stirring ethnic and communal tensions. The JVP and JHU are supporting the Special Task Force. These two organizations are completely hostile to Muslims. They want to break up any unity among the people. In early 2005, with the support of these people, a Buddha statue was erected in Ullai. This heightened communal tensions. This war is designed to break our unity. We all want to live together. Till today, no one has been held accountable. There hasn't even been an investigation into the massacre. It's important to talk about the Pottuvel massacre because this incident is one of many that demonstrate that the Sinhala Buddhist national state is hostile to the existence of any minorities. Even though the Tamils are the ones who are under fire the majority of the time, Muslims have also been direct targets time and again for fascist state violence. On November 9th, the Sri Lankan government started firing shells into an area near Kadiravelli, with the shells landing in a camp containing a hospital and school where civilians were housed. Although the LTTE were in and out of the area, they were not present near civilians when the shells hit the camp. Roughly 62 people died in that shelling. To let a woman tell her story about her husband who died in the shellings.
I heard a blast, many blasts. My husband was in the camp to get food. I went there and I saw the dead bodies and the wounded. I waited 1 hour and then I went in. I heard 15 or 16 blasts in the camp. I saw my husband's dead body in the camp. There was a room where they gave out rations and he was behind that. I was screaming and crying. I didn't take him to the hospital because I saw he was already dead. His body was in pieces, but I recognized part of his face.
The government claimed that the LTTE had used camp residents as, quote, human shields to deter government forces from responding to LTTE attacks. The following year, in 2007, Gotabaya Rajapaksa ordered that the Tamils living in cheap hotels in Colombo be deported to the northern and eastern provinces in buses under police escort. Descriptions confirm that armed police officers entered the lodges of Tamil areas of Colombo, and 376 people were evicted, 291 men and 85 women. Ayyadurai Nadesan was a Tamil journalist and father of 4, originally hailing from Jaffna district of the northern province. On May 31st, 2004, while going to work in Badikalo, he was shot dead by a group of armed gunmen, widely believed to be in the faction of LTTE defectors to the Sri Lankan government led by Colonel Karuna, called the Karuna Group. 4 years prior to his assassination, a bomb exploded in his house. In July 2001, the commanding officer of the 233 Brigade in Badikalo, Colonel Manawaduge, warned and threatened Nadesan. He was summoned to the commanding officer's office and was told that if Nadesan continued to write only anti-government articles, that he would be prosecuted under the Prevention of Terrorism Act passed back in 1979. Ayyadurai Nadesan was one of the first journalists in what would be a long stream of assassination of journalists at the hands of the state and affiliated paramilitary groups.
And I think this is a really important point to underline, is that this tactic has been perpetuated on Gaza as well, and against Palestinians, which is the modern counterinsurgents understand that the press and the media is one of the most dangerous elements of countering their propaganda, countering their lies, and helping to build international resistance to their projects. And so that's why they've continually targeted journalists, they've continually targeted advocates, and that's why, why are so many pro-Palestinian advocates being attacked and sued and blacklisted? Because if people know the truth, if people know the story, they're going to stop their government from supporting it. And so it's very important that these people be silenced by these fascistic groups, by these genocidal maniacs, in order to prevent this information from getting out. Which is why I wanted to thank everybody for coming to my special Sunday screening of Arun's documentary. Unfortunately, I have to go, and I want you guys to keep watching this. So I'm going to send you guys, gals, non-binary pals, right over to Arun's stream. If you've been having fun, or I shouldn't say fun, if you've been edified, if you've been feeling educated, if you've felt like this is a value that people learn about this, then please do stay and hang out over on Arun's channel. And I will be back tomorrow for our regularly scheduled stream, and I'm gonna be in the chat hanging out watching the rest of the documentary. Thank you so much, Arun, for coming on. I appreciate you, man. Sorry I have to go.
For having me.
Yeah, sorry I had to go. It is what it is. All right, everybody, I'm gonna send you over there now, and you know all the links. Make sure you continue to support the stream and Arun's stream, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks, man.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right, how do I do this?
All right, so I'm sending everyone over. So let me I can end the co-stream. Let me just, and if you want to keep going,